Start by obviously pardoning the delay.
So you do agree with it, even if they're exposed in the interim?
Good morning. Thank you for your attendance today. Apologies for the slight delay, and welcome to the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico's listening session on the future of Puerto Rico's energy sector. I am Noel Zamat. I'm the Revitalization Coordinator for the board and moderator for today's session. I'd like to acknowledge and introduce the board members present. The President of the Board, Jose Carrillo, Ana Mato Santos, David Skeel, Arthur Gonzalez, and Jose Ramon Gonzalez. I'd now like to introduce Ms. Natalie Jaresko, Executive Director of the Federal Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico.
Good morning. Thank you, Noel. My name is Natalie Jaresko, and I'm the Executive Director of the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. I'm glad that I'm joined today by our chairman and our members, introduced earlier by Noel. I'd like to also welcome, I know he's a few minutes late, but he will be here, Mr. Christian Sobrino, who is the governor's representative to the Oversight Board, as well as Nisha Desai, who is a member of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority Board and a panelist today, and Jose Ramon Morales, the interim president of the Puerto Rico Energy Commission, and also a panelist today. Thanks to all of you in attendance at this fourth listening session of the Financial Oversight and Management Board, and also thank you to everyone who is watching the live stream of this meeting via the board's website, www.oversightboard.pr.gov. I'm also pleased to say that the audio of this meeting via the webcast is available in English and a simultaneous Spanish translation. If you log into the English website, the audio will be in English, and if you log into the Spanish website, you will hear the simultaneous Spanish translation. I want to frame today's session, if I may, on the future of Puerto Rico's energy sector with the following. Puerto Rico faces a unique set of circumstances, the largest public entity restructuring in U.S. history, and the greatest natural disaster to strike the island in the last 100 years. The energy sector was particularly hard hit by the storm, with severe damage to over 70% of the electric transmission and distribution system. While much progress has been made on restoring the system, today, more than 4 months after Hurricane Maria, thousands of Puerto Ricans remain without power. Consequently, it is imperative that we work to redefine nature and scope of Puerto Rico's energy sector post-Maria. The Oversight Board has long said that a full operational and financial transformation of PREPA, including private investment, is necessary to deliver the resilient, reliable, and cost-effective power system that Puerto Rico needs and deserves for its economic recovery. The electricity sector is at the center of Puerto Rico's viability in the short and long term. The greatest contribution to reduction of electricity rates is possible by changing the fuel mix. Moreover, some reduction can also be achieved by improved operational and maintenance efficiencies. As a result, the governor announced a goal of privatizing generation and providing a long-term concession on transmission and distribution to effectively enable those two components of cost savings and ensure greater reliability. The Oversight Board welcomes the governor's announcement and looks forward to reviewing the plans. We are gathered here today in the spirit of gaining from your experience and your expertise. We are open to all ideas and perspectives and eager to get input from the group assembled and attending today. Today's session has been designed to bring together a wide array of perspectives from leading experts on and off the island. The session will focus on 3 panels. First, recovery and restoration. Second, transformation and long-term vision. And third, new technologies. Our aim is to move deliberately to evaluate the draft PREPA fiscal plan submitted by the government on January 24th and work towards a final certification date of February 23rd. A careful, principled, and transparent fiscal plan is essential. And the board has outlined 12 key principles for that fiscal plan, including low-cost, reliable power, energy resiliency, new technology deployment, and increased private investment and partnerships. There will be time for Q&A at the end of each panel discussion, and a public comment session will occur once the panel discussions are concluded. Anyone with a comment to share should do so during that public comment session rather than during the Q&A here during the panels. We welcome your insights, your comments, and look forward to working together to define a path of recovery and long-term prosperity for Puerto Rico and its residents. Thank you. I'll hand off back to Noel, who is our revitalization coordinator at the board and the moderator for today's panels. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. As Natalie mentioned, we have divided today's agenda into 3 panels. Each panel will begin with a brief keynote address from one of the panelists, followed by the moderated discussion that Natalie mentioned. We've allocated a significant amount of time to develop the topics of each panel, and as for the panelists' cooperation in sharing their thoughts, as well as allowing time for their fellow participants to participate and contribute. Again, one final reminder, this is being webcast live through www.oversight.board.pr.gov and available in both English and Spanish. I would like to call now to the stage the panelists for our first panel, Recovery and Restoration. Mr. Gil Quiñones, President and CEO of NYPA. Mr. Sanjay Bose, Vice President of Central Engineering at Con Edison. Colonel Donovan Aller, Deputy Commander, South Atlantic Division at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Dr. Asha Tribble, Deputy Regional Administrator at FEMA Region 9. Mr. Jorge Martel, General Manager at T-Mobile, Puerto Rico. Mr. Ivan Roman, Advisor to the Board at the Pharmaceutical Industry Association. And Mr. Ivan Baez, Director of Public Affairs at Walmart, Puerto Rico, and Board President at the Puerto Rico Retail Association. As our panelists take their seats, we all know that, as Natalie mentioned, Hurricane Maria caused tremendous damage to Puerto Rico's already fragile electric power infrastructure. As we sit here today, power has yet to be restored to close to 1/3 of the population of the island. In this panel, we're joined by people representing organizations involved in the recovery and restoration to hear key lessons from the process, as well as from representatives from some of the island's most critical economic sectors to understand how we can better prepare to sustain severe weather events without significantly altering operations. And we also have Sue Kelly with us. My apologies, Sue.
American Public Power Association.
From the American Public Power Association. Thank you, Sue, for joining us. I would like to now ask Mr. Gil Quiñones, President and CEO of the New York Power Authority, and Mr. Sanjay Bose, Vice President of Central Engineering at Con Edison, to open the panel with their remarks.
Thank you very much, Noel. Thank you very much, members of the Oversight Board. And to all, welcome to New York. We appreciate your invitation for us to be able to share our perspective, our New York perspective in the restoration and recovery and restoration portion of what's going on in the power system in Puerto Rico. Just see whether, there you go. Just setting up the slides. We're almost there. We have a slideshow. There you go. Okay. Thank you. So Sanjay and I will give this presentation. I will start and set the stage, and Sanjay will go through the bulk of what New York has been doing in Puerto Rico. A day after Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico, Governor Cuomo led a team of 12 engineers from the New York Power Authority, members of the New York National Guard, to fly to Puerto Rico and start working with the Puerto Rican government and PREPA to assess the damage. We left our 12 engineers and 2 drone pilots who worked side by side with the PREPA engineers in starting to inspect all of the substations across the island. On September 22nd, a week after, we sent additional 10 engineers. I fondly call them New York Power Authority's MacGyvers. These are the best of the best engineers that we have here in the New York Power Authority who work side by side with PREPA's engineers, and then with the U.S. Army Corps, our federal partners, and of course DOE and FEMA, who were on the ground at that time. That work took about a month, September 22nd to October 26th, to inspect all of the substations across the island, including the islands of Vieques and Culebra. Of course, this was not the only assistance provided by, under the leadership of our governor, Governor Andrew Cuomo. There were a lot of New York National Guards, New York State Police, people from our New York Port and New Jersey Port Authority, Department of Transportation, helping in Puerto Rico. After we completed the inspections, we came back. Governor Cuomo led, again, a team to come back and assess where the restoration progress is, and recommended that PREPA request for mutual assistance, which they did on October 31st. And Governor Rosselló came to New York on November 2nd in preparation for his proposal to the federal government, which he then subsequently submitted, called Build Back Better. New York State, our team under Governor Cuomo assisted in the preparation of that report. And one chapter of that report, the energy chapter, the New York Power Authority formed a working group. We call it the Puerto Rico Energy Resiliency Working Group. And we created a roadmap on how we thought, what we view as a way to reimagine and strengthen the power grid of Puerto Rico. That report was issued in December 11th. But prior to that, after Governor Rosselló requested for mutual assistance, Governor Cuomo asked us to send a delegation of utility line workers right away to Puerto Rico, and we did that. We sent 450 line workers from the various utilities here in New York, including Con Edison, and about 350 bucket trucks. And they're still working until today, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, including holidays, in restoring power in Metro San Juan. So going on to the Energy Resiliency Working Group, this is a world-class group of experts, both at the state level and federal level, utilities who have experience in severe weather events, such as Superstorm Sandy, our preeminent national labs, partners at DOE, partners at other utilities with a lot of experience in distributed energy resources and such. And so now I will ask Sanjay to give you a roadmap of the findings of this report.
Thank you, Gil, and it's a pleasure to be here and share our thoughts and also welcome some questions from you. I've been with Con Edison for 32 years. Most of my life has been spent in operations, and the last 7 years in engineering. I've been involved in almost every major emergency in the company to get through the immediate restoration and also the follow-up. So, for example, in Sandy, I was the operations chief that night, and through the next couple of days till we did get the lights back on, especially to this part of Manhattan, and then spent the next 3 years designing and implementing the storm hardening features. The most of it was done in-house. So I take you to the next slide. So as Gil mentioned, Early November, we flew in with myself and a couple of chief engineers. In fact, one of them is here, Dan Taft. He's sitting in the back. And we met up with NIPA folks who were there before, as Gil mentioned. And we know them because they're in the same service territory. So we took a damage assessment approach of what was done based on our experience in flooding, high winds, storms, and other things. So we also collect and analyze the post-storm information because since PREPA is not under FERC or any other jurisdiction, it's kind of hard to get information readily available. But we took their reports that they had, which is one of them you can see listed, was a consultant engineer's report from 2013, and an integrated resource plan from 2015 to kind of understand the lay of the land before we went deep into it. And in addition, we did a site-by-site engineering. We realized that some studies are required to actually understand the damage and the system design before we can actually write a Build Back Better report. So here's some pre-storm overview. Some of you probably are very familiar with it. We have 1.4 million customers on an island that's 100 miles long and about 30 plus miles wide. 9 fossil fuel sites, about 7 hydroelectric generating stations, about 2,600 megawatts of peak demand. We don't call it load in New York, we call it demand. The total generation capacity is about 5,600 megawatts. That's about, you can see, 3,000 megawatts more than the peak demand right now in 2016. About 80% of it is owned by PREPA. There are 2 private facilities there. And you can see the rest of the stats on the transmission lines and the distribution lines and the substations. So, for example, just to give you a reference with Con Edison, we have 13,300 megawatts of load in the city, summer peak, and we have 101 substations. So substations in Puerto Rico are smaller but more, and they're distributed all over the place. So one of their substations is equal to about 4 of ours. One of ours is equal to 4 of them. So that's why you see those large numbers of 278 and 178. It's also listed on the slide are some cogeneration facilities that I mentioned, Ecoelectrica and AES, and wind farms and solar farms. But if you add the 2 wind farms and solar farms, that's only roughly about 5% of their generation. And there's 2 landfill gas facilities. And the picture on your right shows the Aguirre plant. We took it from the helicopter. This is after the storm. And a wind farm on the south central coast after, this is also taken from the helicopter in early November, that actually survived the storm. There's a wind farm you'll see later that's along the path of the hurricane that didn't fare that well. So the transmission lines, they run over the hills and mountains, and they suffered significant damage because of high winds. So you see these lattice-like structures in a jurisdiction, and once they can stand up to 110 mile per hour wind, but in areas it was 150 plus miles per hour. And if it gets hit by flying debris, and the specific design of a V-shaped tower with guy wires doesn't do very well under those high wind conditions. The distribution system suffered tremendous amount of damage. Almost 2/3 of it was completely destroyed. And you can see some of the pictures. The bottom left is a distribution poles all down because we call them dead-end breakaways. So when poles start to fall, they actually physically separate and relieve the load of the other poles. Unfortunately, there were not many of them, so once it starts, it's like a domino effect. The rest of the poles start coming down as the trees come down. So the picture on the left, you can see the damage. The picture from the left going to the right are transmission poles. I don't know if you can see them clearly. This is also taken from the V-shaped transmission lines. They're pivoted at the bottom, so when the wind comes in, they start to twist. And it's a great design, but under 150 plus mile per hour, it doesn't survive that well. The third picture from the left is actually a substation we went to. And the debris that you see is all water, mountain water driven that came in and flooded that substation, deposited that debris onto the substation. And on the far right is a wind farm that actually was sheared. Then on the substation end, they experienced some degree of damage, but several were totally destroyed. Extensive damage to the electrical gear, as you can see from the pictures, and to the relay and SCADA equipment that's actually energized 125 volt DC, and when you have salt water or fresh water, it doesn't do
Sanjay, we
very
have
well.
one more minute, please.
Yep. So here are some local considerations. There's some maps that you can see. The hurricanes typically come from the southeast and go northwest, and the preppers map in there. The recommendation of resiliency is a T&D design basis. So our report actually talks about building it for extreme category 4, or which can survive to category 5, hardening some of the things that we have done for flooding in New York, and modernization of putting sectionalizing switches. These are basically small switches that can sectionalize things and not have the cascading effect, and having standards, or Department of Energy standards on hardening and resiliency, and also in the generation to incorporate a lot of distributed energy resources and not have full dependency on fossil fuel. So on the DER recommendation is adding microgrids to improve resiliency for critical infrastructures like hospitals, police, fire stations. There are a little over 159 of these sites. And in addition, there could be other DERs. We call them passive and active. The energy efficiencies from smaller homes to actually active DER, actually supplying power into the grid. And also direct load control. Those things can be incorporated into the new design. So we put a rebuild timeline and a cash flow. We had to put it so how this work is going to, you can see that there. And it's to continue to repair whatever is salvageable right now, then strengthen and grout some of the poles that were not embedded correctly over a period of time. And as you can see, we have to perform studies, and the integrated resource plan, the IRP, we have to conduct that and prep a board, and the TAC is doing that. And then we have to start doing the engineering, the detail engineering to go forward. So at this point,
Yep. So thank you very
Timing
much.
is
And
perfect.
the report is available in Governor Cuomo's website, December 11th. So anybody interested, you can download it.
Thank you, Gil and Sanjay. We'd now like to actually introduce our panelists, and what I'm going to ask is, starting with Colonel Aller, is if you would kindly introduce yourselves, your role, and make a brief statement. If we could please keep those statements to less than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm woefully underdressed. I came in from Puerto Rico last night, and I will return back to Puerto Rico tomorrow morning. Just a real quick snapshot what the Corps of Engineers does in Puerto Rico. We have the ESF3 mission, which is our temporary generation, the blue roofs, the debris removal, and then critical public facilities. Just a quick snapshot of notes. Right now, for temporary emergency power, we have 881 generators throughout the island of Puerto Rico providing temporary emergency power to critical public facilities. To put that number into perspective, Sandy, Rita, and Katrina combined, that's more generators than all three of those events together. We currently have 54,000 blue roofs on, with about 10,000 left to go. We've removed about 2.7 million cubic yards of debris, with about 1.1 million cubic yards to go. We're currently reducing that debris to reduce its space in the landfills by about 66%. Currently on the island, we have about 691 USACE employees, and we currently employ about 6,896 contractors. Of those contractors, about a third of those contractors are local from Puerto Rico to help stimulate the economy. So back to where we are while we're here today. So right now, currently, the task force power that's working on the grid power there in Puerto Rico, we are currently at an 80.7% load based on where we were last year at this time. Currently, we have 70.2% of the meters energized, which equates to about 1.03 million meters out of the 1.47 meters that were pre-storm. We currently have 6 microgrids in place in the remote regions of Puerto Rico, and those were put in place because as we timelined out our assessments, we didn't think we'd get power to certain locations. We did an assessment on the distribution systems, and we're able to put spot generation to bring power to those areas. We currently have a 7th one being commissioned currently with an 8th one approved by FEMA, and a 9th one in planning. We don't anticipate doing any more microgrids because we anticipate the task force power to bring power to the rest of the islands, and we will minimize those need for microgrids. Currently, for transmission, we're about 61% complete. For subtransmission, about 45% complete. And for distribution, about 77% complete. And the long pole in the tent from the task force power perspective is our bill of materials. We currently have 106 containers of BOM en route to Puerto Rico over the next 2 weeks. And to kind of put that in perspective, when you go down to the Port of Jacksonville or the Port of San Juan or the Port of Ponce and you see material there with a date of manufacture of sometime in December, and 3 weeks later it's in the Port of Ponce or the Port of San Juan, kind of sees on how dire the BOM situation is for the task force power there in Puerto Rico. And lastly, we continue to have different items that become critical. One point, transformers was critical. We didn't have enough transformers on the island, so we put contracts in place to bring those via ship, or via bird. And believe it or not, sometimes we have, a 6-inch lag bolt that becomes critical, so we can't put our cross arms on our transmission poles. And sir, any questions? That's all I have for the Corps of Engineers.
Thank you, Colonel Aller. Dr. Tribble.
Good morning. What he said. So the power of FedEx gets you some clothes when you leave Puerto Rico and come here and gets you a coat. So good morning. I'm Asha Tribble from FEMA, and it's an honor to be here today. And the bottom line for FEMA, and I can sum this up really quick, it's about people. We need to get power back to the people of Puerto Rico safely and quickly. So everything else that's going on in the background is fine, but our goal, we're laser focused on the people. It's been a challenge for the last 128, I guess, days that we've been there. But I also want to thank people who took a risk to be there in the beginning. This is different, it's complex, and the elephant in the room, right? The PREPA doesn't have a lot of money that we know. And so there was a challenge getting people who wanted to come there in the beginning. So to NYPA, you guys were there before me, okay? So you guys were there, and I tell you, having the assessments done, it was critically important for us to have an understanding of what was going on. We're still learning what needs to be done, but I appreciate you all taking the risk and coming fast and coming strong. And you guys are still there, right, beyond everybody else. So I think the entire New York contingent came early. Without getting kicked from my attorney, Whitefish was there early. They did a good job. They took a risk. That risk is still being weighed. Cobra came in right afterwards, took a risk. They're still there, doing an amazing job with the technical aspects that they bring to the table. The Army Corps then set up their BOA contracts and had additional folks come in. And then in January, the IOUs and APPA and NRECA brought in their crews as well. So we have a very large contingent now. It's been a challenge, though. I can't say that enough. We're still working through a lot of things. But our goal right now is to get power back, to get emergency power back, and then everything that comes forward, we'll let you ask questions about that. But it's an honor to be here, and we're about people. And I hope that as we have these discussions, we always keep the people of Puerto Rico in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tribble. Let's go down as per our slide. Ms. Kelly.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today. I just want to say, even before I start, based on what I've already heard, I too want to express my appreciation to NYPA for jumping into the breach and working very quick, very hard to help restore power. I would also like to note that I had 4 members who went as contractors, subcontractors to Whitefish, because they felt it was extremely important. They were all in Florida. They had large Puerto Rican populations, so they too went early, either under less than optimal conditions because they really, really wanted to help, and at the time they went, that was the way to do it. So I think their effort should be appreciated as well. The American Public Power Association, why are we on this panel? We're the trade association that represents public power utilities. And we have 1,400 members in 49 states and 5 territories spread throughout the oceans. We're all units of local government or state government, and we include cities, utility boards, public utility districts, and utility authorities. We range in size from towns with 500 meters to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and PREPA is one of our members. PREPA is also part of our mutual aid network, and I think one of the reasons I was invited was because of that fact. I have to explain what mutual aid is. I'll do that briefly. It's just like what it sounds. It's utilities coming to other utilities on a voluntary basis in time of need. My association, along with a series of regional and local utilities, coordinates mutual aid and national events. And we've had a very busy fall, as you might imagine, going from Harvey to Irma to Maria. My staff has spent endless hours on this. And I'm very proud of the effort that we've been able to mount, and I would second what Asha said about how difficult it was. It became clear when Maria struck that the logistics of getting help to Puerto Rico were going to be daunting. And we knew that help would have to come from across the electric utility industry, not just public power, not just IOUs, but everyone, rural electric co-ops, all of us. And we couldn't just deploy as we did on the mainland, where we get our crews and our trucks, we jump into them, we go down 95, we have to deal with the tolls and the gas, but when we get there, we're there, and the host utility is able to put us up and give us work packages, have the material, and that's how standard mutual aid works. This was not standard mutual aid. The only way to get equipment, like bucket trucks to the island, was either military aircraft or commercial barges, and we needed FEMA's help, its Movement Control Center, and the Defense Logistics Agency, and frankly, we still do. Mutual aid was requested from us and the Edison Electric Institute on October 31, and we immediately came together to try and respond to that. It took a while to stand up our effort, but as noted, by January, we have more than 1,500 personnel and a large amount of equipment on the island, as well as federal power marketing administrations. Bonneville Power, TVA, and WAPA are all there as well. So we are making strong progress. To me, at this point, the biggest issue is safety. We are making good progress in restoring, but uncoordinated restoration can result in death, literally, of line workers and customers. And to me, that is one of the biggest issues right now, is making sure that we are carefully coordinating this effort as we move forward. With that, I'll await your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. Martel.
Good morning to all. I don't normally dress like this. My name is Jorge Martel. I'm Vice President and General Manager for T-Mobile Puerto Rico. T-Mobile offers wireless services for both consumer and business through our retail and channels across the island. It's a growing business in Puerto Rico, consistently investing and increasing its employee base for the past 15 years. All primary functions are managed in Puerto Rico by Puerto Ricans. With over 600 employees, it offers an average of total wages and benefits of approximately $40 million a year. T-Mobile has invested over $700 million in the past 3 years. Our service rates in Puerto Rico are the most aggressive from a consumer perspective among all T-Mobile markets. In 2014, we became the Un-carrier, a business model launched by T-Mobile US based on listening to customers and addressing the industry pain points. The wireless industry in Puerto Rico is one of the most competitive in the world, translating into the very consumer-favorable pricing, as stated by The Economist. Consumer rates have dropped dramatically, while more service and features are provided. At T-Mobile, we pride ourselves in always doing the right thing for our customers, and that was proven after 2017's hurricane season. As you all know, Hurricane Maria, as has been expressed here before my fellow panelists, was an unprecedented phenomenon. Given the catastrophic nature of the hurricane, almost all wireless communication was unavailable in the immediate aftermath. Despite this challenge, T-Mobile undertook numerous efforts to restore communications quickly with the highest priority and sense of urgency. Beyond a commercial operation, this was about saving lives. T-Mobile conducted one of the most ambitious endeavors in our company's history in terms of resources and the fastest recovery in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. To give you an idea, the first 2 planes to arrive in Puerto Rico after the hurricane were chartered by T-Mobile, carrying provisions and equipment. We commissioned more than a dozen cargo planes and multiple barges packed full of supplies and equipment during the first weeks after the hurricane. The company made room on its cargo planes for generators and supplies needed by the Department of Homeland Security and other telecommunications carriers. These efforts were led by the gentleman over there, Tony McDowell, one of the first persons to arrive on the island after the hurricane, as well as our local engineering team and over 200 disaster experts that were flown to the island, in addition to suppliers who immediately got to work on recovery. T-Mobile even loaned a large generator to the FAA, which helped provide power to restore the airport and enable to resume airport operations. We are proud to say that each of our 600 local employees are safe and accounted for. Our response was rapid and decisive, including the prompt crediting of wireless service charges for 1.5 months for our entire customer base. Starting with absolutely no commercial power, absolutely no information on PREPA's recovery or healing plan, and very limited backhaul fiber optic connectivity, T-Mobile had to rely almost completely on alternative means, such as temporary generators, which required constant refueling, new satellite communication, and microwave links for connectivity. In fact, to this day, T-Mobile is currently operating 33% of our sites with generators, consuming approximately 5,000 gallons of diesel a day. At a time, it was as high as 8,000 gallons of diesel a day. As of today, 97% of our network is operational. 85% of our retail stores are fully functional. As we continue with recovery and having stabilized most of our operations, we are currently optimizing our network to make it even more resilient. Hurricane Maria clearly exemplified that telecommunications are not a luxury, but a productivity and a survival tool. This is one of the few industries that have grown continuously on the island while providing more services and benefits to customers. Still, our industry is highly regulated and heavily taxed. T-Mobile's strong commitment to Puerto Rico goes beyond the recovery. We will continue to invest in Puerto Rico's future. We are announcing the creation of more than 100 new jobs this month, and we will continue to invest in our network to expand our 4G LTE footprint. Specifically related to resiliency in commercial power and telecommunications, T-Mobile offers the following recommendations. It is critical that telecom industry is treated as a priority, and as such, have detailed knowledge of PREPA's recovery plan as it is common practice in other jurisdictions. Have energy generation facilities in closer geographical proximity to main population areas. Priority should be given to power redundancy on key telecom facilities while carefully addressing confidentiality and cybersecurity aspects. Joint government and private investment in underground fiber circuits and power will help provide more resiliency, not only telecom, but also retail, banking, manufacturing, and other industries. This should include connectivity to remote areas as the islands of Vieques and Culebra. Provide investment incentive for network resiliency in auxiliary power and backhaul circuits.
If we could wrap it up.
And generate rewriting of laws that are restricting or limiting the use of right-of-ways by all utilities to include wireless companies. Thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to working together for Puerto Rico's economic renewal, and we won't stop.
Thank you, Mr. Untitled. Mr. Baez.
Yes. On behalf of the Puerto Rico Retailer Association, we want to thank the board for inviting us and tell a story of, what the learnings and the corrections of error after this disaster hit the island. My name is Ivan Baez. I'm chairman of the board of the Puerto Rico Retailers Association. We are the largest retail association in the island with around 150,000 employees. Our companies include Walmart, Walgreens, Home Depot, Kmart, Sears, Best Buy, and other big retailers and local retailers, among others. We're responsible of the collection of 60% of the sales and use tax of the island, and also pay around $500 million in other taxes. Regarding the association, we are also committed to continue investing in the island, but as you might know, many of our operations were heavily hit, and most of our stores will reopen, or most of them will not open again, because many industry factors, not only the storm, but the economic situation in the island, that should be addressed in a holistic way that includes energy, social, and legislative initiatives to create a more productive economic environment. So besides that, I also work for a small mom and pop called Walmart. We have around 13,000 associates. We're the largest private employer of the island. We're committed to remain investing in Puerto Rico. Of course, we need to have clarity, and we're doing some right sizing right now. But as of now, our commitment with Puerto Rico remains strong. We have donated over $7 million through the Walmart Foundation to restoration efforts, and most recently, around $4.9 million in resiliency programs in alliance with the Mercy Corps and the Walmart Foundation, which I want to thank Viviana Mercado, our Community Relations Manager, Senior Manager, which is there too with us, in those efforts in order to help restoring the island of Puerto Rico. So besides that, we are one of the largest clients of PREPA. We are pay around $30 million per year in energy costs, and of course we're looking here in order to make lemonade from lemons. In this case, because of the situation, we would like to reduce the cost of operating in the island. We would like to have a more positive economic environment to keep investing in the island and attract, including other retailers that can come to the island and make more economic improvements, and also support local manufacturing and local farmers. So this is why I'm here for, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Advice. Mr. Roman.
Yes, good morning, and thanks for... Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity of being with you here today. I am representing the Pharmaceutical Industry Association of Puerto Rico, which groups research-based pharmaceutical companies operating in the island. We have around $10 billion of capital investment in the island in 20 facilities located in 11 municipalities in Puerto Rico, around 80,000 direct and indirect jobs, and we represent about 1/3 of the revenues for the Puerto Rico government. In terms of the characteristics of this industry in the context of the discussion this morning, we have very strong business continuity sustainability plans in place. We have very strong and reliable supply chains for our products, strong and very trustworthy networks for collaboration within the industry members in the island and across the industry and suppliers. This is a little bit different to other sectors. We have a significant amount of private power generation, and in some cases we have redundant capacity in our facilities. And being multinational companies, we have a significant corporate support in the context of technical and financial resources to deal with situations like the one we face during this natural disaster. Another characteristic we have in this industry is that given the high level of technology in terms of the equipment we use and the manufacturing processes we follow, we are very sensitive to power quality. For us, honestly, power quality is the most significant element when we talk about energy. In the context of how we deal with the process, nevertheless, I believe nobody anticipated Puerto Rico going through an emergency of the magnitude we went through. We were very concerned about PREPA sustainability, given the fiscal challenges of the public agency and Puerto Rico in general since 2014. So at that point in time, we start a mutual education and collaboration process through which we invest a lot of time educating PREPA about the relevance of this industry to Puerto Rico, our power demand, our sensitivity to power quality, and also spend a lot of time understanding the PREPA system. So that gave us some advantage going through this process. We have been able to maintain very good communication in spite of the several changes in direction and leadership in PREPA. But definitively that helped us a lot. During this emergency, we start daily communications with PREPA starting September 7th, the day after the first Hurricane Irma. And from that point on, we work hand in hand to assure that we align their recovery plans with the recovery plans of our facilities. Continuous communication was established to ensure proper recovery, and actually we complete that process early January. So that's what I want to put in context at this point, and later on I will talk about the lessons learned on this process.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. I would like to now start the question and answer period. I will lead off with a couple of questions for selected members of the panel, and then I will open it up to members of the board for their questions. The first question I'd like to ask is actually directed to Dr. Tribble and Ms. Kelly. What are some of the challenges that have made the recovery and restoration process more difficult in Puerto Rico based on your experience in other areas?
So I'll start. There was a catastrophic collapse of a grid that already had challenges before we got there. Liquidity problems obviously challenged people from coming. The regular mutual aid process would have kicked in my belief, earlier. Material availability and tracking and getting it there. And remember, we had 2 storms beforehand, which impacted the availability of materials. And I'd also say the working with PREPA in the beginning to try to figure out what they needed on their system was extremely difficult. And part of it is, I think when you have liquidity challenges, they were getting materials and putting things up that would work, but probably not optimal. And because we're FEMA and we have to replace in kind, the things that we had to get access to were not necessarily things that really needed to be on the grid. So we had a huge problem with materials, and to this day, and I think Colonel Aller can validate, we still have a problem getting materials and figuring out what we need on the system. So that was a huge challenge for us. We had a lack of trust from partners that I think PREPA and the government would usually rely on. So, and leave it to me because I'm going to tell you like it is, but we had, there were numerous materials, for example, that PREPA had ordered that couldn't pay for. So those partners that we usually rely on that could advance things weren't doing so. Again, that was a problem. Mutual aid works really, really well, and everybody knows in the mainland, and you can look at Irma, for example. Things work well. We have these relationships established. We know what we're doing. We know we have access to materials, and we have access to transportation routes and so forth. We didn't have that here. And then, of course, we're on an island, which also adds challenges. I believe we had some challenges with leadership. And when you put in an interim director in the middle of a disaster, it's hard. And it's very difficult to begin to make decisions and to feel confident in the decisions that you're making and know that you have the support of your leadership. I'll also say that for us, in an emergency, and again, I'm telling you from a FEMA perspective, in an emergency, when you have 8 layers of approval to get something done, it's not working for us. So, for example, we need a generator and I'm talking a big generator, like 25 megawatts, not a 1 megawatt, but we need a generator and we need it in 48 hours. The procurement process is not friendly. And so waiting 6 weeks to get a generator doesn't work. So for us, in an emergency situation, and when we have the liquidity issues, we have the challenges we had with PREPA, and then of course, the grid wasn't in the best condition when we got there. You put all that together and it's a recipe for disaster. And being there for 125 days and watching the people suffer as a result has been hard. But I will tell you that I go out every weekend into the field. On Christmas Day, I was able to go out with the New York contingent and to light up a community after 100 and something days and have them come out and want to give you things, want to give you cookies and hugs, and the children are out there so excited. It's just, it's amazing, the resilience of the people of Puerto Rico, and I think that's what keeps us going every day, but it doesn't mean it's not a challenge, and we need to do better. And the processes that are in place right now are not conducive for operating in an emergency on the island of Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly.
Obviously, this was not a typical restoration. In a mainland restoration, or even frankly in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where we also spent a lot of the fall working on restoring power, and they are now at 98% of their customers being back online. The local utility requesting aid is your active partner. They know their system. They put together the work packages. They provide the lodging and what we call the wraparound services. And that was not present in this case for a lot of reasons. Asha can discuss that. I don't need to. But it created a lot of issues as a result. And we also had issues with just the terrain, the difficulty, the extent of the damage to the system, its pre-existing condition, which was not good. And all of those things kind of combined to make it extremely difficult. And we had some time getting to what I would call unity of effort and unity of message. There were a lot of players. The activities of those players were not always coordinated. FEMA had appointed the Army Corps to be in charge of power restoration. This was new ground for them. It was new ground for us. And it took some time for us to figure out those working relationships. I think at this point, we are, firing on all cylinders. We have the 1,500 people there. We are working on restoring power. To me, again, the biggest issue is getting the materials to the crews as they need it and getting the right materials in their hands. And I have to go back to safety. This idea that we're just going to hire crews and work on lines without coordinating that with other people who are working on those same lines, it just can't happen. I mean, that must be coordinated because otherwise there will be safety incidents and that will adversely impact the entire effort.
Thank you very much. Does any member of the board wish to have any
Yeah.
questions?
I just want to, just a clarification question. I believe the Colonel, I didn't follow instructions. I believe you mentioned a number of statistics. The one statistic, I just want a clarification. What is the percentage of customers? And when I think of customers, it would be the businesses and the homes that are actually receiving power.
So, sir, what the number we get from PREPA is the meters is what we're tracking. As they go down the distribution of the feeders, right now we're tracking 1.03 million meters are currently energized out of a 1.4 million pre-storm meters. Now, I will tell you that as we've gone through and energized different meters, we have energized meters that were not energized prior to the storm. So the data that we're using in cooperation with PREPA and all the partners to kind of get an understanding of those numbers. We've settled on 1.47 million meters pre-storm, and right now we're at about 1.03 meters energized.
And just to clarify that one step further, when power is restored to the meter, does that necessarily mean that the home or the business is actually receiving power? So in other words, is there another connection past the meter that needs to be addressed in certain circumstances?
No, sir. So if you're getting at the last mile, so that we had some issues early on where we would do distribution, and then our crews, I'll say crews across Puerto Rico, not just our core crews, did not have an understanding of to connect the last mile, i.e. take the power from the transformer to the weatherhead, whether the weatherhead was damaged or what have you. We have worked through the majority of those, lack of a better term, legalities, and yes, when we power from the transformer to the weatherhead, that business, house, or home meter is then energized. There is nothing else required from our perspective. Now, if there's issues inside the home, that is the personal property of the owner, and they have to account for that themselves.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let me, well, first of all, let me thank everybody on this panel for their tremendous work on the recovery and restoration of power in Puerto Rico, particularly, of course, FEMA and the U.S. Corps of Engineers, the American Public Power Association, and very particularly the New York Power Association and Con Ed, who stepped in so early and have led the way in restoration. I think it is extraordinarily gratifying, really, as a Puerto Rican, to see the outpouring of support from the mainland that helped Puerto Rico, is helping Puerto Rico get on track again and help us identify what the issues are. And I saw the representative from FEMA very bluntly and clearly identifying some of the managerial issues and process issues that made this restoration process very difficult. But on a more technical side, my view, and I think general view of PREPA before the hurricane, was that the great weaknesses, the great concerns lay in the generating side of the equation, i.e. we had old plants with old technology, expensive to run, overly dependent on fossil fuels, and that's what we were mostly focusing on, how we moved away from that generating capacity and improved generating reliability. I don't think we were really focusing on, I would say we, I mean the PREPA and the people of Puerto Rico, on the fragility of the transmission and distribution structure. So particularly NIPA and Con Ed, who did the assessment, I mean, how much of the collapse of that grid was due to, do you think, design or lack of maintenance, or how much really to the fact that it was a tremendous storm of rather unprecedented power in modern Puerto Rico since we've had an island-wide distribution grid? So how much can we really correct it for the future? Because it was really transmission and distribution that collapsed. I mean, the power generating stations themselves, with all their shortcomings, didn't suffer that much damage, as I understand. So could you comment?
So I'll take that question, if that's okay with you. So our site visits have shown that it's a combination of both design and lack of maintenance. So if I had to put a percentage on it, and when you say lack of maintenance, these are steel structures, so you have to keep it painted. And on the electrical side, there were many issues that we observed that maintenance, right amount of maintenance or timely maintenance would have prevented some of the damages that occurred by keeping the lines alive during a storm. Because you're sustaining some very heavy forces. And some of the areas, like in Manhattan, we have, after Sandy, we have plans to de-energize certain things. So even after the storm goes by, recovery after putting energized equipment, electrically energized equipment in a storm is not a very good thing, because then the recovery takes longer. On the other side, on the construction, for example, I'll give you an example. Typically on the main line, it's also PREPA spec, that a pole, when you put it in the ground, it should be 10% of the total length plus 2 feet. That's a standard industry practice. Our personal observation, including myself, that those embedments were not done correctly. So they were shallow. So then you had 25 inches of rain, ground softens, you get heavy winds, and the pole comes off. In addition, other things we saw is heavily loaded lines. When I say it's not what I mean by that is, we lease out our poles for T-Mobile, fiber, and other things.
Cable TV.
Cable TV and other things. So when you have a pole which has load on top, then you overload it, then you have soft soil, not having embedments. It's not one single thing that I can point my finger at. It's a combination, and when you have, we call it defense in depth, and once you lose that defense in depth, then it just collapses. So yes, it's I would say 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
But
If I may add to that, what you mentioned, the specific laws where we're thinking about a hurricane, you're thinking you want less poles around for aesthetic view. A hurricane comes in, everybody's in the same pole. The pole goes down, everybody goes down.
Right.
So that's something that needs to be rethought right now. You want to have different assets. So one asset goes down, you have different assets out there, and other companies, they will still have connectivity, be it power, be it telecom, et cetera.
So these are the things one should think about during restoration. You really have to do some redesign and develop new standards, really.
Right, so we have addressed those in our rebuild report, because what we also observed, some good things that people in Puerto Rico had thought of, is putting monopole design, a single pole without the ladder structure, and they survive pretty well, and they will, because wind just goes around it, and they have proper embedment.
These are for transmission.
These are for transmission, also for distribution. So instead of putting them above the mountains, and also you want to protect the ecological beauty of the island, because tourism is a huge GDP, right? I know pharmaceutical is a lot. So if you take them and put them down on the highways, along the existing highways, that protects them from wind, and it's also easier to get to, maintenance, building, and it will not go down. So we have addressed that, like Gil mentioned in the report, there are sections on it, which talks about 4 different loops to T-Mobile, so you can swing power around. So the generation, most people say the generation is trapped in the south. There's a lot of generation in the south, and we need it in the north. So the way we look at it is, you can design an electrical system using, I'll throw this complicated thing, it's called a phase shifter. So it's not where the generation is, it's our inability to move electrons from south to north. And putting these devices in, you can just move it or go around. So, you know, if you live in New York City, if you live in New Jersey and live in New York City, you know, and you try to commute every day by car, we know those ways around. Otherwise, it takes you like 4 hours to get home. It takes less time to go to Puerto Rico. So having designed a system where you have the ability to move power around is actually what we address in the report.
But we indeed see some lack of maintenance,
Yeah.
especially in generation and substation.
And substation.
Thank you very much.
One thing, positive thing about all of the structures, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at least the structure, let's say I know more wireless structures, et cetera. The majority of them withstood the hurricane, and those that did not fell structurally like they were supposed to. You know, or there were not, no tragedies out of that.
It's not on the system.
So are you suggesting the failure of the wireless system was mostly due to the failure of power rather than the failure of the actual towers or infrastructure?
Power and, sorry.
Now it's too much. Okay.
Power. Power and connectivity, what we call backhaul, fiber. The fiber that they mentioned go through the same poles as the electrical, et cetera. People usually think visually a structure. Yes, that's part of it. That's connected usually by a fiber optic. Fiber optic goes down, your connectivity is down. We were able to restore that mostly through microwave dishes, et cetera, you know, and allowed us. But yeah, it is mostly fiber optics and power that went out.
May I? Okay, go ahead.
So part of the redesign is running the structures along the highways, but typically it's 230,000 volts and 115,000 volts. We're saying to redesign it to 345,000 volts and 138,000 volts. That gives you more clearance, more mechanical sustainability, plus the fiber optic now runs along the poles in shielded wire, so that's far more it's used in the mainland. So,
I would like to ask a question, if I may, to Ivan Roman of the Pharmaceutical Industry Association, which is still the largest, as he well noted in some of the statistics he gave, the largest sector contributing to GDP in Puerto Rico and generating the largest financial resources for the Commonwealth itself. I was always under the impression that you portrayed of an industry that was extraordinarily strong, resilient, with backup power to sustain in all sorts of circumstances. But I did hear of circumstances where, in fact, there were failures to be able to continue production in some products, some areas, or at least logistics failed. Maybe it wasn't just power, but logistics, which led, in fact, to shortages of some products in the whole U.S., injectables particularly, et cetera. Would you care to comment on that? I mean, was there, in fact, a failure there of power backups, or was it logistics, or what is behind some of those concerns?
That's a very good question, and in reality, I believe the topic of medicines shortage was taken out of perspective. Plants located in specific location in the island were the only ones facing that type of situation, and also the ones that produce the type of medicines that are highly demand. So the event per se generates incremental demand. So generally speaking, the business continuity plans the industry had in place were able to manage inventory properly, not only in the United States, but keep in mind that these plants supply globally. Going back to your point about strong power generation, the answer is yes. Most of the plants had enough capacity, as I said at the beginning, some of them even redundant capacity, like 1.5, 2 times the amount of power needed. But I believe no one in Puerto Rico was thinking about running several months without power. In our case, we also have significant amount of diesel storage, so we never had problems of having diesel available. And we also have very strong supply chains, as I said before, but dealing for several weeks or months, running on emergency power became a challenge, but not to an extent to provoke inventory challenges that as an industry we're not able to manage.
Thank you.
I have a question. First of all, I'd love to also join Jose Ramon and thank all of you for all the work that you've done on behalf of our people. It was a question for Mr. Román. You mentioned that your industry was very, of course, interested in not just in the quality of the power that is received. I wonder if you could perhaps talk a little bit about that prior to the disaster, how your industry saw that quality and the importance of that to the industry in Puerto Rico going forward.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mentioned quality because we normally in Puerto Rico, when we talk about energy at any point in time, not necessarily in the context of the disaster we had to deal with recently, we talk about cost of energy in Puerto Rico, and that has been the discussion, I believe, since ever. In the case of our industry, our manufacturing processes are continuous manufacturing processes, which means that in some cases it's very difficult or even impossible to resume a manufacturing process whenever you have a power failure that could be of seconds or fractions of seconds, or having variation in even frequency or voltage. Because of the level of sophistication of the equipment we use, they are very sensitive to those changes, again, in the quality of power and the financial implications for a particular operation of having soft variations in frequency or voltage can translate into significant financial losses. So that's why I mentioned that quality is so important. And I believe we are not maybe the only, but one of the very few industries in Puerto Rico that is so sensitive to power quality. So back, as I said before, in 2014, given the challenges we saw looking into the future about PREPA sustainability, that was the way we call it at that point in time, we decided to gain better knowledge of what is the reality of generation and distribution in PREPA. And as Mr. Gonzalez said, most of the people believe the challenge was around generation because of it was obsolete or whatever system. So again, looking forward, for us it's very important that in the system that we restore in the future, power quality becomes a key variable of design.
Thank you.
I would like to add to Mr. Roman's point that our industry is also very sensitive to the quality of power. Many of big box retailers cannot operate totally normal when the power was restored because of the fluctuations. So it keeps generators going up, then going down. It was a really, really difficult situation to operate under these conditions. Besides that, I would also like to recommend, as a correction of error or for future preparations, that our industry and the supermarket industry should be included as tier 1. We have to, to go to the EOC and start selling that we are important to stabilize the population, because at the very beginning we were not included, and retail and supermarket industry is very important to help stabilize the population under these circumstances. So this is a recommendation.
Good morning, and thanks for being here. Gil, nice to see you again. I had a question for the NYPA team and anybody else on the panel related to something that you mentioned earlier regarding the abatements of the poles and the different structure that you have for transmission. And I think my question goes to an area that's going to affect other rebuilding efforts that we conduct, not necessarily related to power. What did you find regarding respect for right-of-ways for maintenance of the transmission facilities and the effect of informal construction in Puerto Rico on those efforts? I see all of you reacting because I know exactly what you're thinking, but I think it's very important that we have this on the record and everybody hears what the effect of that was in Puerto Rico.
Well, let me ask our engineer's engineer about right-of-ways.
So it's not the same standard as in the mainland.
Of course.
Right? So we have, for right-of-ways, you have transmission line going through, you don't have trees growing underneath it, or at least 60 feet on either side of it. That takes away wide swaths of very beautiful landscape. But what it also does is when you have a conductor between the towers and you have trees growing right underneath it, when lines get overloaded or you get wind, they touch the trees and they fail. So, so one of the things is part of doing this report and working along with PREPA folks and the local folks, you know, the easiest thing to do is, okay, let's do right-of-ways and just clear cut and do things. But then that destroys the ecological balance in there. Hence, we sat back and when we were flying over, we saw these highways that were constructed after these transmission lines were built in the 1940s. And, you know, you have that aha moment and you say, okay, this would be a good compromise. You bring them down to where the highways are. It's easier to get to, and it's easier to do. From a restoration standpoint, I saw Army Chinooks and other helicopters actually had to lift the towers and put them there because there were no road access to it. In one case, you know, that delays restoration, and, you know, so you can have a compromise in Puerto Rico. You know, still maintain your lush greenery and have very strengthened and high, you know, and a highly reliable transmission grid. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I think from the APPA they're going to say something else, but something that I remember at least when we were in that first month in the recovery efforts, when I speak of informal construction, it's not only in the rural areas of the island. You had informal construction in some of the most well-to-do neighborhoods in San Juan where they extended their backyard and included power stations or power poles in their backyard right beside the very nice fern garden that they had. So it's something that we need to work hard, and I hope that it's addressed in the report. I'm sorry.
I'd just like to add two things. First of all, you know, we did get reports back from line crews that were working down there of examples of what you call informal construction, some of which they felt were noteworthy enough to take pictures of and send home, like, you know, wow, look at this. And one of them being a pole that was coming out of the top of a house, you know,
Yes.
distribution pole. That was new to us, let me just say. The other thing is vegetation management. There's the issue that was raised by Sanjay about, you know, where do you put it, how wide is the right-of-way, but once you pick that right-of-way, you got to maintain it. And one of the ways of maintaining is ensuring that you have periodic vegetation management that goes through and ensures there's not vines or trees growing into the lines themselves. And we saw a lot of pictures of that as well. I just wanted to get that on the record.
And if I might add another angle, right-of-ways, it's limited for wireless in Puerto Rico and other companies. Very restricted at who has the right-of-ways. This is common in other areas. So you permit companies to go to restore their assets, to place network assets in the right-of-ways. And when a disaster strikes, the recovery could be a lot faster that way.
Ms. Kelly, you said that the mutual aid requests were a little slow in coming. Could you say when those requests came in, and are they fully engaged now? And is there anything else that ought to be done to further speed the recovery?
We and the Edison Electric Institute both received a request for assistance in power restoration from PREPA on Halloween, October 31st. A few days later, that was extended to include the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, which is the trade association of rural cooperatives. And that's when we started our efforts to mount our restoration effort. I think at this point, we have a very good contingent of people on the island, and I think they are now organized because of the incident management teams, and I want to give a shout out to Carlos Torres, the storm boss, who, went down to kind of honcho this effort and is working very hard on that. I know he and Asha are kind of joined at the hip. But, I think the effort now is, the issue is to work it, make sure they have the material, make sure they have, the wraparound services that they need to do their job, and let them do it.
If I could add real quick, some of the things that we talk about speeding it up, the long pole in the tent has been materials from day one. A lot of the things on the electrical grid for PREPA, I mean, we have 200-300 types of transformers when industry standards like 3 or 4. So when you look at when we do this plan, look at a common bill of materials that's conducive to that. For example, there's a special type of cabling called the Puerto Rican Special that only is done in Puerto Rico. So when we go back to manufacturing, manufacturers have to retool their manufacturing process to produce these specific items that are only for the Puerto Rican electrical grid. Now, of course, they're making a cost-benefit analysis as a manufacturer. Do I want to shut down my thing to make this and make X dollars when I can leave it going and make Y dollars? So that's something we got to kind of look at as we go back into this and took a out-of-the-box thinking of, okay, let's build it like we do in Florida or Texas or any place else, so that when we do bring in our mutual aid partners and they bring their truck stock with them, they can use that on the Puerto Rican grid. Because right now, in a lot of cases, they can't, which then creates these, what we call pacing items, where we can no longer work X, Y, and Z because of a special galvanized thimble or a specific bolt that is not used on the grid in the United States.
And just to mention, there were 18 substations completely flooded, so they either have to be relocated, elevated, and protected by flood walls when they're reconstructed in the future.
I also just want to make one more point about mutual aid, because when we first got there and spoke to Ricardo Ramos, who was leading PREPA at the time, mutual aid between APPA companies is what would be typical. But I think the other thing that we have to remember is the type of damage that was done to the transmission system is well beyond what APPA would typically be able to send in terms of construction crews. So that's why the Whitefishes and the Cobras of the world, were also necessary. So even if we had a perfect mutual aid system, we still would have needed additional types of crews to come in to work that transmission system.
Just,
something in your presentation around damage to underground systems. And you talked about loss of the poles, which makes sense, but also looking at damage on the underground. Can you talk a bit more about that?
So are you referring to the depth of the pole or the underground facilities?
In the deck, you talk about damage to poles and to underground
Right.
connections. And I'm trying
It's
to
from
understand the
flooding?
underground side of the equation. Flooding?
It's from flooding. So most people think, it's fresh water coming down the hills. What it did is, what we observed, it drains into the ocean. And what it did is kind of block the pipe going into the ocean. So when the tides came in, the salt water actually mixed. And salt water, and I know I can show you thousands of pictures of what happened in Sandy during saltwater damage. So that's what causes the damage.
Got it. And then you mentioned the 4 times as many substations as you see in New York. Can you talk about that in the context of thinking about resilience, and is that an issue to focus on in the rebuild relative to challenges of maintenance and all the factors you mentioned?
Sure. So in a way, it's actually good to have many small assets as having one large asset. And that's from both a weather-related or a human-made security issue. So if you destroy a large facility that destroys a lot of things, it's hard to recover from it. If you have smaller facilities, it's easier to recover from it. So one of the suggestions in the report is to have containerized substations. And we have some concepts from companies like ABB and Siemens. We've been working with them. So that addresses 2 things. It stops the flooding. It also stops the stealing of copper and theft in these small areas. It also gives you interchangeability. They're plug and play. We have used it in Con Edison as resiliency transformers, and we're going that route. So you can, they're 40-foot containers, the standard cargo containers, and the equipment is inside. So if you do get damage, and they'll be elevated, and if you do get damage, you can just take that one out and put another one in. And to the Colonel's point here, now you have a single set of spares. You can pick it from somewhere and bring it over, and not have this unique type of build and design. So we can share those. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank
Okay,
you.
right.
Yeah. It's on. Thank you. I should have thanked you all earlier, and appreciate that Jose and Jose did that. But a question I have about industry it seems to me that some of the comments are about industry standard and the failure to have industry standard equipment, parts, connections, et cetera, that would make rehabilitation or repair easier. What does it stem from, and it being the lack of industry standard? Is it a failure on the part of management to think this through? Is it a result of changing managements and different views as to what company you ask to purchase the equipment from? What causes that?
So I think I'll take that technical question. So I did get involved in December trying to get 1,500 distribution pole-type transformers down the island, and we had a bunch. A lot of people had and you realize something simple. You know, we have 3 things on top of our transformers. They have 4. And the reason being, and some of the U.S. utilities do too, because they take their neutral and they reconfigure it differently. Because ours, we run that wire down, and the reason it's done is because people were stealing the copper wire coming down. And that's not good in day-to-day operation, the neutrals. So you configure it so you have to climb on top of the transformer to do it instead of cutting it down the pole. Hence was the difference. We worked out how to work our transformers, but yes, we couldn't readily use our transformer stock there. There are 3 other utilities that have similar designs on the mainland, and that's done exactly for that same reason. Because you cut the neutral, you will have some electrocution issues. So, and they're done in remote, in the west and the central part of the mainland, we do that way. So, you have these poles running down some remote areas. You will never know that till somebody gets electrocuted. So there was a reason for it. It's not, so can we change that design and have the neutral come down, but inside the pole so you don't see it on the outside, not easy to get to? Yes. And then you can use any of the transformers that we have. So there wasn't like a willy-nilly, this is going to be a Puerto Rican design. It's all this thinking goes back. So you have to go back, dig back into the history and understand why it is that way.
So one other point that I'll make is some of the parts that are on the Puerto Rican, PREPA's power grid are, I don't want to say obsolete, but they're not made anymore. And so as we try to go back and replace like in kind, talking to FEMA, we go back to code, but there's some challenges with getting those parts. And so for me, if I have to have an ASL or a supply of extra parts, I want to minimize that as much as possible, so I don't have to have 1,500 different lines. If I can have 50 and still maintain my grid, it goes in it. So as the grid was kind of, for lack of operational maintenance over time, or Band-Aids they kind of put on it, it worked. But when they did that, they circumvented certain things that then when it gets brought down, makes it problematic to come back and do it properly.
So there was a failure of periodically updating the system so it would conform with industry standards at the time.
Right, so it's not just maintenance, it's also capital investment to take, I shouldn't say obsolete equipment, but things that you can no longer support from a maintenance, perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have time for one last question. I'd like every panelist to give this thought and make this succinct and quick. What one lesson learned and recommendation at the execution or policy level would you give to make sure the challenges that we had during restoration never happen again? Let me restate that. What one lesson learned and recommendation at the execution or policy level would you recommend to ensure this is not repeated? And we'll start with Sue.
I think one of the things that really came home to us is the interconnected nature of all the services. And by failing to give electricity restoration Tier 1 status, even in a limited way, that set back a lot of other efforts. It set back telecom, it set back hospitals, it set back water. because if you don't have electricity for the pumping station, you're not going to get water. So our plea, as we do our lessons learned, our hot wash, whatever you want to call it, is to think about how we can prioritize electricity restoration so we're higher in the queue. And I'm sure everybody's saying that. You know, we all want to be tier 1 in our next life. But, you know, I think it's really important to understand the interconnected nature of electricity and how that can cause problems with so many other sectors if it's not addressed quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, from my perspective, I would recommend to eliminate the inventory taxes. I think that not having the storage, the products in order to have a rapid repair has become a threat to the island future issues. So we have to think about this. It's outdated, and if we had enough storage of products, not only for the recovery, but water, food, and stuff like that, maybe we shouldn't be having a hard time in the recovery process during those months.
Thank you.
There are many, many lessons learned on this experience, not only from the power perspective, but in general. So it's very challenging answering your question about saying one. But if I have to, I would say business continuity plans. I believe that most of the things, this is a very unique experience, and it's the first one in 100 years or so. But certainly, many things went through over the recovery process that we should anticipate, and I believe that's the opportunity moving forward.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll second, excuse me, I'll second what I said, priority. To be treated a priority, and just basic communication, unfortunately. We need to go to basics. We found out about PREPA's plans, reading the paper, and looking at Twitter. It should be, we should have tighter communication on that, so everybody restored. When they were repairing, then they were taking down our telecom, as we were. In most jurisdictions, that's done, with communication, people follow one another. So there are many, as they mentioned, but I'll go for the basic. Just giving priority to telecom and the key industries, what our population is asking for, and just basic communication. As they're restoring, we're restoring, everybody wants to restore, we want to do it efficiently together.
Thank you.
So I'll repeat that. I think we need discipline in the system when we're talking about communication and making sure that people understand what's going on. I think that's something that we suffered from, where there were so many people speaking on behalf of PREPA and what was actually happening that it was setting us back. So I think we really need strong discipline in the system. This goes to safety as well, across the board with communications with PREPA.
So for execution, I'll say from the response perspective is just a understanding of what the requirement's going to be from the standpoint of what generation needs to be on the island for temporary emergency power. We're 120 days out past the storm, and we're still dropping generators for critical public facilities on the island of Puerto Rico. So that was due to a lot of different things. One was inventory. We were constantly bringing generators from the mainland to Puerto Rico, and it's not like putting on a line haul from Texas to Florida. It's got to come across a barge, a lot of process involved in that. Not to mention that the fuel that powers those generators has got to come across that barge as well. So the prepositioning of assets on the island for a response to this type of a hurricane. To go to the policy part of that question is, and Asha will support me, I believe, is the Stafford Act. Flexibility in the Stafford Act to allow us to do certain things that are tied to potential resiliency, but sometimes our hands get tied with regard to what we can and can't do with regard to response money or emergency money, which in the best interest of the island or best interest of an entity, but we get hamstrung sometimes. And so when the codels come down and we talk to different codels, that's what they're harping on. What can they do from a policy perspective specific to the Stafford Act to give us the flexibility to do more execution quicker than get caught up in the bureaucracy? Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think I agree with everything that was said. I just would like to add, from our deployment in Con Edison, a couple of hundred crews and trucks, now to think back, we should have sent an advanced team to Puerto Rico, like a reconnaissance team, to work out the logistics, firm up the relationship between ACE, PREPA, and other agencies. Because when we first arrived there in early November, we had to kind of scramble around trying to understand the lay of the land and who to talk to, like things have been mentioned. So that's something we would have done. So just in one word, it would be an incident command structure, the ICS system that's used in the United States. for major emergencies. That kind of helps. We were trained in ICS, it's now going through now, but right from the get-go, that would have been a tremendous help.
Thank you.
We have a mutual assistance system that works extremely well in the U.S. mainland. So the playbook in the U.S. mainland works really well. We clearly need a different playbook for U.S. territories and maybe for Hawaii and Alaska, right? Because it's a completely different context, and that playbook needs to be drilled and exercised.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of our distinguished panelists for their time, their insights, and their willingness to come and share some very honest feedback with us. Thank you very much. We will be taking a 5-minute break before moving on to the next panel.
Thank you very much. Sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Christian.
of the Puerto Rico Energy Utility. I would now like to call to the stage Ms. Nisha Desai, board member at the PREPA Governing Board, Mr. Jose Roman, interim president at the Puerto Rico Energy Commission, Mr. Stephen Doig, managing director at the Rocky Mountain Institute, Mr. Jose Rossi, board president at the Institute for Competitiveness and Economic Sustainability of Puerto Rico, Mr. David Owens, executive vice president at Edison Electric Institute and member at the PREPA Transformation Advisory Council, and Ms. Maria Illich, visiting professor at MIT's Institute for Data, Systems, and Society. In this panel, we will be discussing ideas and possible strategies to develop an energy sector that is resilient, reliable, and cost-effective in the long term. In a minute, I would like to ask Ms. Nisha Desai of PREPA's governing board to get the panel started with her remarks. To get ourselves back on time, I'm going to ask, we have reset all the clocks. The keynote speaker will get 7 minutes, and then there will be 4 minutes for each of the statements from the panelists, at which point we will start the Q&A period. Expect to get ourselves finished with this panel shortly before 12:30 to get us back on time and get everybody to lunch. So without further ado, Nisha.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you to the FOMB for inviting me here to speak today and to share our thoughts on transformation and long-term vision for the future of power in Puerto Rico. I'm one of the independent directors serving on the governing board of PREPA. I have a 25-year career in energy and infrastructure, usually serving at the cusp of change in the energy sector. My prior background includes solar development, energy storage, and serving as the head of all growth activities for NRG's distributed generation business unit. I'm honored to bring that experience to bear in this challenging task of transforming the power sector in Puerto Rico. I'd like to start with some context. Transformation in the utility sector is a global issue. Even if PREPA were not bankrupt, struggling to recover from a Cat 5 hurricane, and suffering from decades of underinvestment in its infrastructure and its people, we would still be facing the same imperatives to transform as the best power companies in the world. We're all facing the rise of distributed generation, the empowerment of customers, the demand for renewable energy options, increasing threats to resilience from the growing impacts of climate change, an aging workforce, aging infrastructure. These are issues that are causing utilities all over the world to consider what is the future of the power industry. What does Utility 2.0 mean? How does the utility business model evolve? Granted, the circumstances that bring us here today have much higher magnitude and much greater urgency to address than for the typical utility. But true transformation to this utility of the future has a much wider scope than emergence from the Title III process under Promesa. It has a much wider scope than getting the lights back on and preparing for the next hurricane season. It requires thinking about a whole new industry structure for the power sector in Puerto Rico beyond reforming PREPA. So that is why we formed the Transformation Advisory Council to help us, TAC for short. The TAC is composed of senior executive leaders from the power sector who are each intimately involved with transformation in the energy industry. They're volunteering their time to guide us because they share a belief that by bringing the best industry experience to bear, and by working together, we can accelerate a transition to a globally recognized model for the utility of the future, right here in Puerto Rico. And believe me, the rest of the world is looking to see what we do. With the help of the TAC, we have articulated a vision for what this future looks like. Yesterday, at the monthly meeting of the PREPA Governing Board, we formally adopted a vision for the future of energy in Puerto Rico. Our vision is based on 5 key pillars. First and foremost, our vision is customer-centric, focused around empowering customers and providing them with options, including the option to self-generate and even deliver power and services back to the grid. Second, our vision is premised on financial viability, positive economics on both sides of the meter. What that means is that we want to deliver power and services to customers at a rate that's affordable to them, while providing a fair cost recovery, including return on investment, for providers of power. Third,
we're looking for reliability and resilience. That means really being thoughtful about the architecture of the grid, whether it's centralized, regionalized, or distributed, and making a conscious decision about how that architecture meets defined goals for reliability and resilience. Fourth, we want to create a model of sustainability. We all know that Puerto Rico has blessed with solar resources, wind resources, and the costs of those technologies are coming down and compare incredibly favorably to the current power generation infrastructure. We want to progressively decarbonize the power sector and encourage the adoption of increasingly cost-effective clean energy, both at utility scale and behind the meter at the customer premises. Finally, our vision is for an economic growth engine for Puerto Rico. Affordable, reliable power encourages new businesses to come to Puerto Rico, and innovation in the power sector builds a local ecosystem of technology and service providers that can export beyond Puerto Rico. I know you all share this vision, actually. We've just articulated it, we've formalized it, but the real challenge is, how do we achieve this vision, and how do we get there from where we are today? There are certainly multiple efforts, multiple plans being developed by multiple parties. There's a recovery plan and a financing strategy and a microgrid framework and a Build Back Better plan, to name a few. They all need to be tied together in a single coordinated transformation execution plan, and that is our focus. The governor has already announced a privatization strategy that will be the major part of this transformation, and the governing board of PREPA is wholeheartedly in support of this direction. The first phase of the privatization plan involves the development of a legal and regulatory framework for a privatized utility. At the same time, we also need to create the framework for how that privatized utility coexists with a wide array of customer-centric options, such as microgrids that buy and sell power and other services to and from the grid. We plan to leverage the support of the TAC, the regulator, other stakeholders, and customers to propose this framework and market structure. Another key work stream is the development of an integrated resource plan. We've already started the process of identifying best-in-class consultants that can bring the latest tools and techniques for modeling and planning the infrastructure for a utility of the future. With PREC's oversight, they certify the RFP process. We plan a formal launch of the RFQ process in the next 2 weeks, and we commit to an open stakeholder process for completing this IRP. These efforts are foundational, and amongst other things, will inform the exact structure and process for Governor Jaresko's announced privatization plan. They also allow us to get going on independent power producers, public-private partnerships, non-wires alternatives for serving customers, and enabling customer-owned alternatives. Alongside, we are also working on operational improvements, restoration and recovery, short and long-term financing strategies. There is a lot of discussion about governance, obviously. As the governing board, we talk about that a lot, as does the FOMB, as does PREC, and FEMA, and DOE. But for my closing remarks, I would like to focus on something that currently only a few people are talking about in the context of power transformation in Puerto Rico, and that's leadership. You see, when it comes to governance, policies, procedures, rules, people comply. But when it comes to transformation, to driving culture change, to changing hearts and minds, to making and accepting tough decisions, people follow people. They follow leaders. They look for inspiration from leaders. They accomplish great things under leaders. And that is why we, as a governing board, are in the process of a search for the first non-politically appointed CEO of PREPA in its entire history. This leader will shepherd the organization through the transformation required towards our vision. In addition, Todd Filsinger, PREPA's chief financial advisor, will lead the further development of the coordinated transformation plan in conjunction with counterparts from the governor's office and coordinating closely with FOMB, AFAF, and other stakeholders. We have a long, complex road ahead of us. Transformation will require unprecedented commitment of all stakeholders and will include some difficult decisions to get there. With the leadership team we are putting in place, we are hopeful that we can drive the processes and bring all the stakeholders together as we build a customer-centric utility of the future in Puerto Rico. Thank you again for inviting me to address the board and the audience, and I look forward to hearing the insights from the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisha. If we could have each of the panelists now introduce themselves and provide a brief statement. Again, let's try to keep this below 4 minutes. Give back the time for a good Q&A session. And also, if you hear any feedback on your microphone, please move your mobile devices and iPads and tablets away from the mic. Thank you. Jose Roman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chairman Carrion, members of the board staff, and everybody here today, thank you for the invitation today. My name is Jose Roman. I am the interim chairman of the Puerto Rico Energy Commission. The purpose of regulation is to induce performance, high-quality performance at reasonable cost. That purpose is the same whether we're addressing monopoly markets or competitive markets. There are 3 principles central to effective utility regulation. First, for each major service required to bring electricity to our citizens, the provider should be the most qualified to do so cost-effectively and reliably. Secondly, for electric services that are most cost-effectively provided through competition, there must be non-discriminatory access to all bottlenecks facilities which access is necessary for competition and which are not economically duplicable by new entrants, such as transmission and distribution facilities. Lastly, in introducing competition, whether at wholesale level or retail level, one must be careful to align competitive opportunism with economic efficiency. Otherwise, there is a risk of cherry-picking on economic bypass and stranded investment, along with cost shifting to the most vulnerable segments of the population. An objective understanding of the century of electric service on the mainland shows that the transition from monopoly markets long dominated by a vertically integrated company to competitive markets hosting numerous viable sellers requires expertise, patience, and time, and is best accomplished by an objective, well-resourced, independent, and expert commission. But that independence must be more than legal. It must be practical. There are 2 intrinsic traits of practical independence: substantive and financial. Financial independence entails access to sufficient resources to assess all areas of the utility's performance, and then, for areas where performance is subpar, identify, order, and oversee solutions. Substantive independence entails the ability to install objectivity, professionalism, and consistency into its procedures, and that its decisions are based on a rational and professional analysis of the available information and facts, free from outside intervention. An optimal regulatory framework must also promote a culture that accepts the presence and decisions of the independent regulator. That does not mean that a utility must refrain from challenging unlawful regulatory decisions in court, but recognition of the regulator as a professional and objective entity is a key enabler of an efficient market. The Commission's role is to objectively and effectively implement and execute the public policy adopted by the government. To that end, the Commission is ready to leverage its expertise and knowledge towards ensuring the successful transition from the current PREPA-dominated energy market into a diverse, modern, and resilient market. This process, however, takes multiple steps, complex determination, all of which are critical to the successful implementation of the plan, which are determining the desired mix and quantity of the products and services, determine which products and services are natural monopolies and which one could be provided through competition. For each category, determine the qualities inherent in companies that are most likely to produce it cost-effectively. Create criteria for competitively selecting the provider of monopoly services. Create criteria for licensing companies seeking to provide competitive services. And for the competitive services, take all steps necessary to convert the market from a monopoly market to a competitive market. The existing regulatory framework empowers the Commission to oversee the transition towards a competitive market structure and to adequately and effectively regulate its actors. While we recognize that some changes may be required to further strengthen and clarify the Commission's role in implementing the proposed transformation plan, the Commission, as it currently stands, has broad and unequivocal authority over private market actors. This authority includes power to set rates for investor-owned utilities, oversee and ensure the quality and reliability of the electric service, ensure non-discriminatory access to energy services and facilities, review and approve resource plans, review and approve technical and safety standards, and approve sales, mergers, and acquisitions of energy assets and companies.
30 seconds.
Thank you for your time. You just beat me to it.
That's it. Timing is perfect.
Timing perfect, like always.
That's all.
Thank you
very
for
much.
your time. Thank you for the invitation. I'll be more than happy to participate and to hear what everybody else has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Doi.
Thank you. Thank you to the board for inviting Rocky Mountain Institute here, and thanks to the audience.
Pull your
And actually,
microphone.
Stephen, can you
Yes.
your
Pull it
microphone a little bit?
closer.
Oh, sorry. Thank you to the board. Thank you for the members of the audience. And actually, thank you to those who were just on the prior panel and the people doing the yeoman's work down in Puerto Rico to actually restore essential services. That is obviously a first priority. So my name is Stephen Doig. I'm Managing Director at Rocky Mountain Institute. I've been there about 10 years. I lead our islands team. We've been down there about 5 years, so we're quite familiar with energy systems in the Caribbean. I also have a team in Africa that's actually quite used to and grapples with systems that have lost power or don't have power. So these are areas of expertise for us. Rocky Mountain Institute, for those of you who don't know it, is an independent nonprofit. We're market-led with 35 years of experience of advancing secure, reliable, and sustainable energy systems. The thing today that I wanted to comment on were three or 4 points, and they really build on what's already been said. One, the thing for everybody to realize here is there's actually an opportunity for a win for everybody. This system can be more resilient and reliant. The system can produce less volatile and lower energy costs. It can become more sustainable. It can become more equitable. And it can become more nimble in the face of the energy revolution that is enveloping the power system today. And I say those not just as aspirations, but of things that we've actually done in some of the island nations of the Caribbean, efforts that we have ongoing in Africa right now, and the 35 years of experience that RMI has in the United States. So the good news is I think there's an opportunity for everybody here. The question then would be, well, how is this seeming miracle possible? And really there's 4 things to think about. First of all, energy technologies, both in supply and demand, and their interfaces with customers are rapidly evolving. This is the most revolutionary time in power systems since the inception of power systems in the late 19th century, and taking hold of that opportunity and grabbing and running with it is the thing to do. And then it's really important that we now have really clear and robust processes developed over the last centuries that will allow one to capture these benefits in a fair-minded way. And finally, utility business models are evolving rapidly to move from just being pure power producers to service providers. And that opening up of different ways to think about power systems creates new opportunities as well. So what will it take to capture these benefits? 1, a transparent, inclusive, and fact-based process. And this doesn't have to be slow-moving. It can actually happen quite quickly. Number 2, utilize up-to-date market-based data, not conjecture and historic data. 1 year is old in the power industry these days. Third, a robust plan that creates no-regrets actions that can happen right now, as well as a long-term perspective that guides the system over time and over government transitions. A least-cost mindset, but balanced with other societal goals and needs. Rapid implementation coupled with world-class procurement processes that are well matured in other parts of the world. And then finally, a balanced sharing of power and decision-making. In other words, energy is a public good. It's a public essential. We've heard that in the last panel. And so it's really important to create a healthy tension between those who operate and those who oversee. Let me just finish by providing you with a few points of inspiration. We've done work in St. Lucia and St. Vincent in the last couple of years where they do have a robust integrated plan that included the utility, the government, and public interest groups to create a common plan and a way forward, and they're acting on them right now. Nigeria, where I work, has a truly challenged energy system
and they're moving now to replace 10 gigawatts, not 10 megawatts, 10 gigawatts of small-scale generation with mini-grids. A New Mexican utility that we've worked with closely, Electric Co-op, signed a PPA recently for 4.2 cents per kilowatt hour power on a 3-megawatt plant. And you're much larger scale here in Puerto Rico. So with those thoughts, I leave with you. I think there really is an opportunity to win on all fronts, and it's more a matter, as was said, bringing leadership to bear and making it happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Joey. Mr. Rosie.
Good morning. I will aim to be the voice here of the consumer. I've lived in Puerto Rico all my life, also of an investor. I'm in the building trades and building services business. But I come to speak mostly as the chairman of the ICSE, the Institute. It's an effort by the Puerto Rico private sector, multi-sectorial, nonpartisan, looking for the public interest, lowest cost at this time, affordable, competitive, sustainable energy, base energy cost. Now, talking about leadership, I would like to mention that we think in Puerto Rico, in addition to better leadership, PREPA, better leadership, our politicians, we need to talk about governance from the standpoint of better leadership, all involved in the regulatory processes. We believe that there isn't a good governance culture in Puerto Rico. All of the companies here in this slide I'm showing are contributing up to $300,000 cash plus more money in kind every year since 2015 as the only approved regulatory process intervener, all processes since Puerto Rico started regulating energy services in 2015. And what I would like to say as I listen to the panel beforehand and to the people that have spoken so far is that in addition to leadership, we also have to consider what the constraints are here. There's been a lot of talk in Puerto Rico lately and a lot of promises that would make a regular consumer not accustomed to coming before these panels to think that we have all the money in the world and that creditors are not going to affect the outcomes nor the bankruptcy process of 99% of our power distribution industry right now, which is PREPA. And I think we have to recognize as well that it's not clear to Puerto Ricans the who, the what, and the when. Too many people, whether fiscal board, Mr. Samot, whether the governor of Puerto Rico, whether Mr. Roman, and all the lawyers at millions of dollars every year that are trying to figure out who's in charge, who will lead the charge, who will regulate, are talking right now. And I think we're scaring away both consumers and we're scaring away investors and we're scaring away opportunities to collaborate, to avoid conflict, and to get things done quickly so we have a debt adjustment plan and we can start talking about the big projects. In the meantime, I would add, there is regulatory proceedings happening in Puerto Rico right now that have to do with the little guy, that have to do with the first responder in municipalities, that have to do with the people that have capital, that can invest in their homes, their businesses, to provide energy security to themselves. This thing is getting regulated right now through the microgrid regulatory proceedings. I believe we need to get more involved in the regulatory proceedings right now, collaborate, avoid conflict in them, because we can actually help create markets without having to wait for court proceedings, without having to wait for grant plans, even though I acknowledge that is the big question. Looking forward to participating in the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Rosie. Mr. Raw.
Good morning. My name is David Owens. I retired from the Edison Electric Institute. I thought I retired in June. And then I got this call to help out Puerto Rico. I'm the chair of the Transformation Advisory Council. I'd like to spend a little bit more time enhancing the dialogue that Nisha Desai started. Tell you a little bit about the Transformation Advisory Council. I've got 4 decades of experience in the utility industry. I worked on every aspect of the industry. I was one of the participants in the recovery efforts surrounding Superstorm Sandy. I've been involved in a lot of proceedings across the United States involving grid modernization. People would say the change in electric utility structure. The Technical Advisory Council has the important responsibility, as Nisha said, of creating a world-class utility system in Puerto Rico. So what does that mean? It means that we want a much more reliable electric system, a much more resilient electric system, an electric system where rates are more affordable, an electric system where customers have engagement, where they're empowered, and a cleaner electric system. So that's what we're about. I am complimented with a tremendous number of very smart people. So, for example, let me give you some of the backgrounds of some of the people, just to give you a sense of just how serious we are about helping Puerto Rico be a world-class utility system, have a world-class utility system to drive economics. We have retired CEOs who have tremendous experience in bankruptcy. We have a lot of senior officers who have tremendous experience on system planning, system operations. In fact, Sanjay is on our team, and I know he's very impressive. You heard him this morning. We have folks that understand rate making, that have tremendous understanding of all the aspects of reliability and resiliency. We made sure, too, that on our team we had different types of ownership utilities. So we have private utilities, those who are senior officers of private utilities. We have participants who manage island utilities. We have participants who manage public utilities. We have participants who manage co-ops. So we felt it was very, very important to have diversity in the experiences of all the members of our team. We believe that it's very important that all of those who are involved in this, not just PREPA and the Energy Division of PREPA, not just DOE, not just FEMA, not just the Oversight Committee, but all interests look out of a single lens. We call that a vision. And we believe that, as Nisha pointed out this morning, these are essential elements. We can debate whether we're going to have a more decentralized grid and all those other elements, but it's very, very essential that we have certain factors that are looked at, and we all agree on those elements of this overall vision if we're going to create this world-class utility. And that means that you need to be able to give the customers an important voice. And large industrial customers, as an example, they argue for power quality and resilience. So they need to have a very active voice in how the utility will be redesigned and redeployed in a way that meets their evolving needs, as well as residential customers. This is in front of and behind the meter. We need to make sure we can prescript capital. That means that the entity needs to be financially viable, and there needs to be clarity. If you make an investment, you're going to recover your costs. And if you make an investment, it's clear and it's transparent where that investment is going. We think that reliability, it's got to be very clear now. There are all levels of reliability, but one element of that is resiliency. Substantial area. If you build a system, the system needs to be able to withstand major disruptions. And we need a clean energy system, and so renewable technologies are a key part of that. Those are the kinds of things that the TAC will be doing. They'll be looking at the integrated resource plan, obviously the fiscal plan, and the interrelationships of all of these elements to create a world-class utility in Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Professor Illich.
Hello,
I'm here to represent actually MIT, somebody else from MIT Energy Initiative, Mr. Rob Stoner and Don Lessard were supposed to come, but I was the third choice, I guess. So no, they could. Rob is somewhere in Nairobi. They're doing a lot of universal service with developing countries. So I just want to resonate for a minute with Ms. Desai's observation about really huge changes in the industry across and the need to rethink how we operate and design the system. So Puerto Rico happened to be the immediate problem, but I think we have a global problem, as you said. And I have spent for myself about 40 years now at several top universities teaching and doing research. And the general observation is that it's very hard to actually link innovation to the tech transfer in power industry and align it with the needs of the industry. So this is what we are facing now here in Puerto Rico is really a problem, but in the same time is an opportunity. So speaking a little bit for MIT Energy Initiative, they have taken a very proactive role. There was a workshop a month ago in close collaboration with Puerto Rico people on rethinking a sort of mid-range, long-term vision for resilient and sustainable Puerto Rico. I am also very affiliated with MIT Lincoln Lab, which is working very proactively for Department of Defense on microgrids for air bases and military bases, and there is a lot of experience there. Several years ago, when Ernie Moniz, before he went to Department of Energy, he funded look at Azores Islands. Can we make Azores Islands sustainable? So there are some things here that I have listed that I don't want to go in time because of shortage of time, but there is a lot of experience at MIT, so MIT is taking a sort of proactive role to help. As an immediate step, I think on the next slide, we have a follow-up to these workshops where we want to develop a new quantitative model for Puerto Rico that could do several things: test and confirm the regional configuration, provide better basis to prioritize investment, and conceive the grid, which is more of an open system rather than top-down system. And this is key to addressing both resilience, as Mr. Sanjoy both talked, and industry people, by relocating, elevating infrastructure and putting generation closer to loads. But the thing that we are emphasizing and want to show is that it's probably impossible to build 100% resilient, strong grid without making it smarter. So there should be a lot of effort on intelligent grid. And there is a lot of push for microgrids and solar, but there is going to be quite a bit of time before we rely fully on these microgrids. So how would you rely gradually on limited role of microgrids? We are engaging into this, and we are trying to collect the data with Puerto Rico people to do this study and sort of demonstrate the key concepts that need to be rethought. For example, you have to have several likely changes in the grid design. Islanding, how do you do islanding? How do you extensive self-supplying management of municipalities, for example, and also how do you interact these distributed resources with bulk power system? My recommendations, maybe more personal here before the study has been done, is that we really need to address these specific challenges. In the US, we have seen this. There have been 10 years of support under President Obama for smart grids. At the end of the day, we still have very slow process of integrating microgrids. We don't know how to operate them. And also, there is need for smart regulation. So all that has to be addressed in Puerto Rico if we are going to do the rethinking. So there is definitive need, and just a plea for the role of universities in demonstrating this through simulations and so forth, rather than just speculating how it might be, because a lot of these things are complex. Thank you. So my slides are much longer, and they will be available, but I'll be happy to talk to people later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now start with a few questions for the panel, and as we did last time, we will open it from questions from the members of the board. My first question for the panelists, and let's just say Stephen and Maria again. What would be the first investment that you would make in the Puerto Rico future electric utility to achieve this vision that everybody is talking to? And it can be a technical, it can be a policy, or it can be a regulatory issue, or none of the above, something different. What would be the first investment you would make? And I'll let Stephen start off.
Oh, Steve,
Yeah.
please.
That's a great question. No, I guess for me, the first investment I would make is to actually have a plan that, at least in the broadest strokes, allows you to know how much lower cost energy, whether that's renewable or some other form, can be brought onto the system. What the impact might be of some moderate level of microgrids that might be islandable, and to understand what the impacts might be on the finances of the system as a whole, the impact on the ratepayers. So to me, it's very hard to move forward without that plan, although I think early on it could identify several no-regrets moves that could be made right away that would improve the situation.
So I think this is a fairly low-hanging fruit for utilities in the U.S. also. The current operating practice for reliability is to have enough reserve, enough capacity standby for N-2, which means if 2 large pieces of equipment fail, you still have to serve the customer. What do we do if you have N-10? Nobody can have that much reserve. So we really need to enhance the software that system operators have so that they have some advisory software that's going to tell them, as the situation evolves, how to allocate the resources available, ranging across everything, microgrids, the most critical ones, and so forth. I want to mention that Lincoln Lab is leading an internal project that we would be happy to share. We are using the Northeast, one of the ISO data, without mentioning the specific names, where you show, for example, that let's say 2 nuclear plants go out. What's going to happen in the Northeast? With this very careful, smart identification of where are the most critical things, where you should do the best load shedding and so forth, you actually can save the system and continue serving customers. In other words, having a gradual degradation versus blackout, full blackout. This is so long overdue in the U.S. utilities, and I've made testimonies to FERC on that and so forth. I think we need to move with that.
Thank you. I'll ask a question of Mr. Owens. You mentioned that there is a common vision for the future of the utility based on some relatively well-accepted best practices. What organizational and policy structures are necessary within that framework you mentioned to restore public confidence in the utility?
I knew you would ask me an easy question. Well, from an organizational standpoint, are you speaking more directly about how the utility should be organized, or?
Everything's on the table.
I don't believe that there is a single answer to how the utility should be organized, but I do believe that if you're, for example, focusing on resiliency and all the elements that I spoke to, that it's very important that you ensure that those critical loads are always sustained. And if we look at the Puerto Rican electric system as an example, it's a centralized system. And the transmission system, as we have heard this morning and you've discussed in other occasions, is a system that needs to be redesigned. So some would argue that, well, why don't we have it to be more decentralized, where the power supply is closer to the load center? And why don't we reinforce the grid surrounding that? And one way of reinforcing that grid would be to create some microgrids, some would suggest. I think that's a plausible solution. In addition, if you're seeking to reduce your carbon footprint, you would rely less on oil technologies and more on renewable technologies, cleaner technologies. And if you're giving customers greater control and management over their overall power supply, you would partner with the customer You would partner in front of the meter, and you'd partner behind the meter. You'd put in, for example, smart meters. I know when we had Superstorm Sandy as an example, we were looking at utilities in New Jersey who had no smart meters, and in other parts, we didn't know precisely what customers were out. And so with AMI, you do get a read. It's a digital link between the customer and the utility. So those would be the kind of technologies. It's important, too, that you have a regulatory framework that people have confidence in, a regulatory framework that permits the prescription of capital and the return and the recovery of that capital, and to stimulate investment. So transparency is going to be very, very important. So those would be some of the elements that I would look at if you're looking at redesigning the system and if you were looking at the regulatory oversight.
Thank you. I'd like to have a,
Yeah.
go ahead.
My question is to Ms. Desai. I apologize if I mispronounced it as well. I certainly applaud and welcome your statement about PREPA Board's commitment, intention to have a non-political appointment process for its leader. But my question really is, what has been done or should be done or will be done to ensure that that process is non-political?
So from the search committee process, we have the 3 independent board directors of PREPA actually leading that search. So we've hired Heidrick & Struggles as the executive search firm to assist with that process. So they have placed an array of candidates in front of us. We've gone through an interview process. We are close to making our final selections, and it is legally our responsibility as the board, the governing board of PREPA, to be able to extend and make that offer.
I understand that, but when you say independent board members, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that independence is independent of PREPA. The board members, the independent board members, I believe, are still appointed and serve
I was
at the
appointed, and I
pleasure-
was confirmed by the Puerto Rican Senate, and I serve a fixed 5-year term, which is non-coincident with the political cycle in Puerto Rico. I live in Houston. I, am very active in the energy community at large. I'm not impacted by Puerto Rican politics.
All right, thank you very much.
May I add something? I think that one thing that we are thinking at MIT about the Sloan people is sort of aiding, the board and leadership with an systematic interactive planning process, by which you have a process by which people are, by the time, with the well-defined time by which people are going to propose their investments, and then you have a well-defined, reproducible, quantifiable process which says why one has selected these investments versus the others, what were the performance criteria, and so forth. That could be done, to sort of support both the claim that's independent, but some of these technologies are not really just capacity-based. If I build a large generator, I'll solve the problem. There are all these very fine things like the microgrids are aiding resiliency, and how do I account that in the planning process if I assume that the demand in Puerto Rico is going to grow 5%? It doesn't even see it. So I think we really need a systematic, interactive, and also integrated through boards and so forth process, which is quantifiable and allows everybody to bid, over some time. So in the US, they have sort of capacity markets, a little bit of that, who is going to build what at what time and how that gets selected. But, enhancements are needed for that also. I think it's possible to actually, if you have the right performance metrics and establish protocols and standards for what are you buying and selling, to actually have a more defendable process.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion on building resiliency into the future grid of Puerto Rico. And that discussion is happening while we still have recovery operations ongoing. I would like to ask the panel, and I would like a difference of opinions on this. How do you integrate long-term injection of resiliency into the Puerto Rico grid with near-term recovery operations? And I'm going to actually ask the regulator to give his response based on the regulatory structure, and then I'd like Mr. Rossi to give us his view based on the economic standpoint.
Thank you. We are facing a challenge, indeed. We have to electrify the island as quickly as possible, but we need to build better for the future. That building better for the future is a process that needs all the best minds to get together. It takes time. But there are steps that can be taken right now. As the previous board identified, there are lessons learned from Sandy that can immediately be implemented, and that will not necessarily be something that will impact the long-term planning or the results of a long-term plan. Those types of actions can be taken right now, but at the same time, we have an IRP that is going to be filed in a few months. That IRP now needs to incorporate the new history, or the new history of Puerto Rico, the actuality of Puerto Rico. How do we incorporate what is being added now? Thanks to the previous panel, to the long-term plan. How are we splitting centralized generation with decentralized generation? How are we introducing now markets? It's not only about where the market's going to be located at. It's going to be at the wholesale level. It's going to be retail level. It's a balance of decision. It's a process that needs the participation of all stakeholders. It needs make it a competition of all the ideas, the best idea, so the best idea to survive, and then we can build better for the future.
Thank you.
We like what we see with the microgrid regulatory process. We would like to see very robust collaboration and conflict avoidance, the fiscal board and the regulator. I'm sure we're going to get great ideas from PREPA's new advisory leadership. And we're also going to get great ideas in a good, well-regulated process from actual investors that will have to deal with the actual capital costs of doing anything in Puerto Rico now and into the future. And if we hurry up, conflict avoided, a robust process that the consumer and the investors believe in, because the fiscal board and the energy commissions, the people that have actual legal power to document the process and then bring it to bankruptcy court. I think we will do well both immediately with the microgrid regulation that's happening right now, as well as with the longer term decisions on how larger microgrids can integrate. But I must say, right now we don't have a schedule. We're not sure that the governor understands that he and PREPA propose to a regulatory process, and that regulatory process then has to confront the bankruptcy proceeding if we aim to get debt adjusted. So right now, what I would say to this panel and to the others is what I'm saying to all consumers in Puerto Rico and people that want to have a minimum of energy security. Insist on a well-regulated microgrid a process that is approved by the board as well as by the regulator, and get a minimum of energy security in your home and your business and industry, because hurricane season starts in 6 months now.
Stephen, go ahead.
Thanks for Bill's comments. I think from the board's perspective, one thing to know in your mind and heart is that when you look at all the money that will be spent on power in Puerto Rico over the next 10 years or so, A very small fraction of that will be the capital costs that are going in right now just to restore the system. The vast majority of the money will be spent on fossil fuels in order to power the system. And so the business case for putting in a more distributed system, potentially involving microgrids and other technologies, energy efficiency, is not degraded by actually getting the power back to all people and all businesses in Puerto Rico right now. And so that's the good news. The business case is not being diluted by the effort to actually restore power now. Yes, on the margin, there's maybe a power station that shouldn't be restored because once you put a microgrid in, you don't really need it, or not a power station, but a substation, or it could have been smaller. But if you keep that in mind, it does actually give us the time, although we need to move quickly, and the next hurricane season is coming, we need to actually think through what are the things that can bring the highest degrees of resiliency at the lowest cost and allow the system to both become more resilient and more cost effective.
Thank you. Mr. Guerrero?
Yes. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I have a question for Ms. Desai. As you know, the government has proposed a new regulatory structure for the Power Authority. And well, I'd like your thoughts based on the fact that you're involved in the energy sector in the States. In terms of best practices, what do you think? Do you concur with that view? Or do you agree, as we have stated, that we feel that the energy regulator for the new energy provider in Puerto Rico should be entirely independent?
I think that the goal is definitely an independent regulator. So I'm not as familiar with the exact details in terms of the roles of the various commissioners in terms of the restructuring that's been proposed. But I do think that it's very important that the regulator be independent. I think that it's very important that the regulatory framework be one that is a balance between allowing for return on investment for investments that are made potentially by privatized utilities or by customers or by service providers. And so I think we need to know what that framework is, and that there is a process for interacting with the regulator and for proposing rules and for working in a very fair process, both for customers and for the service providers.
Thank you.
I have a question for the panel, and like Mr. Owens' point of view on this one, and actually Mr. Desai's as well, and Stephen, Mr. Doig's as well. Right now, there's a lot of discussion on microgrids, distributed generation, and what that means for the assembled crowd is that there's going to be a future, a very conceivable future in Puerto Rico, where energy is not generated, produced centrally, but rather very close to the customer and the end user. In that future, it is very difficult to actually generate revenue for a centrally managed utility. That is the genesis, if you will, of this Utility 2.0 discussion that's been consuming the community. What steps can we take now in the transformation plan to walk that thin line between future-proofing and not staying married to an archaic past that's going to drive more grid defection?
Do you want to take that first, or shall I?
Ladies before Jim.
Oh. Well then. So this is why I think it's very important for the regulatory and market and legal framework for getting out of bankruptcy and privatizing utility to be really thought about in the same vein, with the same process as how to enable customer-side generation and microgrids. But I also think that we need to think beyond just a cost of service type of model or a rate of return on investment type of model for regulatory, for basically how the central utility makes money. So I think we can look at what's going on in New York, what's going on in California. We can look at what's going on in competitive markets, and we can look at, evolution in terms of how grid services are being paid for and how customers can or should be compensated for that, for power they may be sending back to the grid. But then there's also this evolution in terms of concept of the utility as a distribution platform and getting provided for services, not for providing kilowatt hours, but for providing services, providing access to the grid, for providing balancing, for providing load management, for providing backup, for providing export capabilities for the power that the consumer wants to produce at their premises. So I think that these are things that we need to think about, and it's a little bit more complex than just, hey, let's privatize the utility or figure out how to negotiate with the creditors. I think it's, how do we bring that thinking up front? Because if we don't, we may not get a chance to do that without the same type of fight and long, convoluted process, which is, which everyone else is fighting through when it comes to, evolution to this utility model of the future.
Just augment, if I might, some of the things that Nisha said. But I'd start out by saying we have that kind of experience on the TAC. So we have representatives on the TAC who are very active in the REV in New York, members on the TAC who are active in California. So we're getting that real-time experience and input. The electric system, on mainland electric system as we know it today, is a system that is a hybrid electric system. It consists of centralized utilities, vertically integrated utilities, and some companies that are not vertically integrated utilities. Some companies that own wires and power supply and so forth, and they're all have the same set of goals. So I'll go back to that. What are you trying to achieve? I think we're trying to achieve reliability and resiliency. We're trying to balance three interrelated issues: reliability, and subpart of that is resiliency; affordability, which I think is important; and sustainability. So those are three areas. You first have to say, what's the objective function? That's the objective function. Then the question becomes, how do we get there? How do we achieve that? Well, one of the things you certainly want to do is make sure that you serve your customers. Your customers have a huge voice. So you want to make sure, as I look at what's been occurring in Puerto Rico in terms of the loss of sales to industrial customers, the attrition, then one real important thing is to dialogue and to partner with those customers and to find a way that you meet their needs. And if those customers say, resiliency to us is power quality too, then you have to make sure that you give them that opportunity. That opportunity may be that they may have their own distributed resources with energy storage backup and so forth, but you're a partner with them. The vital link to all of that is a grid. You gotta have a viable, modernized grid, and particularly at the distribution system. So there needs to be investment in that grid. So how do you conscript the investment and make sure that you can build that grid? Well, you need to make sure those customers stay on, make a contribution towards the investment and the modernization of that grid. So reaching out to the customers, getting a better sense of how you can meet their resiliency and reliability needs, I think is very, very critical. There's no one approach. There are multiple approaches to address this. Microgrids are something that can be done incrementally today in order to protect and in order to give those customers power quality. You want those customers back up as quick as possible, but you also want to give them resiliency. So a microgrid could help give those customers resiliency. Once you begin to get those larger customers who are providing jobs, and those customers are able to run their processes, then you can begin to make investments in other parts of the system and create confidence and improve the economics. So I think it's an incremental approach, but you have to focus on a common vision and the elements of that vision. And I believe that they relate to reliability, resiliency, sustainability, I think is very, very important, and affordability.
Can I ask, it's not a follow-up question, but sorry to keep you talking, Mr. Owens. Could you say a little, because I'm going to shift gears with the question, could you say a little bit more about what the advisory council is doing? In particular, do you see your role as transitional, important now but less important later? What role do you envision having in the privatization process? Will your role shift? Could you just say a little bit more
Well,
about
first we have an advisory role, and I think it's a pretty influential advisory role, because we have tremendous talent and expertise on our advisory council. And that was by design. We wanted people that had all levels of experience, that are from all types of utilities, so we could bring all of that to bear on looking at critical decisions that are being made to make the Puerto Rican electric system a world-class system. So, for example, the Integrated Resource Plan, which is a major step, that lays out the brains of how you're going to evolve the system. We believe we're not going to do an Integrated Resource Plan study, but we certainly believe that we should look at that Integrated Resource Plan, and we should look at some essential elements. If there are gaps, if there are substantial questions we have about elements of that, we should be able to give input and advice that will lead to an outcome that would be beneficial to Puerto Rico. With respect to the fiscal plan, and you can't look at these plans separately, you got to look at them in an integrated way. With respect to the fiscal plan, which has some very important elements in it as well, we'll look at that fiscal plan. We'll say, wait a minute, that fiscal plan has some things that don't really make sense, or has some things that may be missing. When we look at how the utility should evolve, whether it should be privatized, and what privatization means. They're very important elements. There's got to be clarity so you can make investments, clarity so you can recover capital, the investments that you've made, clarity with respect to where you build and how you build. That was addressed this morning. We talked about the right-of-way for transmission. All of those are things that the advisory council can provide some input on, because we have that expertise. So we don't see our work ending with an IRP. We actually see our work becoming more concentrated as these evolutions take place, as we're trying to build a world-class system in Puerto Rico.
And if I can just chime in there, effectively as the customer for the TAC, I think the TAC really will be, for the most part, privatization agnostic. Right? I think in my remarks at the beginning, I said that transformation is this global issue, and it has nothing to do with us getting out of bankruptcy, or, I mean, we have to do that. We've got to recover from a hurricane, but we have to transform. And so, in my mind, the value of the TAC is going to be really in helping us address those kind of business model kind of questions. What is the evolution of the utility business model for the utility of the future? Now, with respect to privatization, which is really a question of, who kind of owns the responsibility for delivering the services? Is it the public sector or the private sector, or is it some kind of, structure that involves a combination of both? The TAC itself at large won't really be involved with that. However, we do have individual members of the TAC, specifically the New York Power Authority, who has some very discrete expertise that they can bring to bear on those structuring questions, just because of the work that they have done with evaluating options for, similar decisions that had to be made in the state of New York for the Long Island Power Authority many years ago. So, discreetly, as kind of we certainly have access to that expertise, but as a body, the TAC, again, is really more focused on things that are quote-unquote privatization agnostic.
Maybe if I could just add a couple of hopefully practical thoughts. These mechanisms of business models of the future are not worked out. New York has spent an enormous amount of time over the last 5 years itself trying to think about the whole REV process and how to create functioning markets. And I'm not sure that actually a totally integrated and connected grid will be required in Puerto Rico in 15 years, given that it doesn't have heavy industry like steel making and smelting. So with that kind of in mind, I think it's really important not to try to get a perfect market right now, but to try to think about where can you make bets in the power distribution system, the power system itself, where you're fairly certain that you'll get a better deal for the customers and a better deal for the system overall. And if you travel around Puerto Rico and fly over it, as I did with my colleague Roy Torbert, you can tell out in the tentacles of the grid, there are areas that are far more expensive to serve than the ones that are more in the central locations. And I think if the plan that goes forward and the IRP that's created and the business models that consider, think just about segmenting the market, both geographically and in both in types of customer types, and thinks about where to run the first tests and to try to develop business models for those initial sites, which really aren't going to affect the grid that much, but will start to give people real experience. Then you'll get feedback on what seems to be working and what's not without making big bets. And the good news about the power systems that are going to probably be put in and about distributed energy itself is you don't have to make the bets that you make when you put in a nuclear power plant. You better bet right in that case. If you're making a bet on a megawatt system, a 10 megawatt system, even a 50 megawatt system, this is pretty small. And so I would just suggest that as the Commission's looking at this, as the IRP is created, look for some very practical ways to just test these business models. There's probably no one perfect one, so testing several at a time might be a good idea.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
One final closing comment from each of you. What one input would you recommend to the fiscal plan currently being developed and certified to ensure this future that we have been talking about? Let me repeat that. What one input would you recommend to the fiscal plan currently being developed for the Puerto Rico Electric Power Utility to meet the future that we are talking about?
Do you want me to start?
I'll start with Nisha, yes.
Okay. I think that when we think about the plan, we have to remember that plans are only good until you get punched in the face. So we need to be also thinking about resilience in the plan itself in terms of, flexibility. And a year from now, if technology costs have, changed wildly from where our projections are today, and believe me, they will, the plan itself is flexible enough to be able to, evolve with changing conditions, particularly on the technology side.
Thank you.
I think the key input for the fiscal plan really is the IRP. You need a strong IRP. And I'm not just talking about a plan. I mean, I've been hearing all the panelists. The IRP process, the evaluation of the IRP to determine not the perfect solution, but the solution that works, goes through the process of all stakeholder input and analyzing the data so that the data is present so that when it comes to the fiscal plan, you can be sure that that information is there, that has been evaluated, and there's evidence supporting that that plan or that goal or that path forward has been fully vetted by a lot of stakeholders and have been approved by the Commission. But most importantly, monitoring right after that. The plan is a plan that is alive. By statute, needs to be reviewed every 3 years, but it can be reviewed even in a shorter amount of time as technologies change, as situations change. So that's what I would recommend would be the key input to the fiscal plan.
Thank you.
Jose Roman has essentially already said what I was going to say, so let me be brief. Nobody has a crystal ball on the demand of the future in Puerto Rico. We hopefully it is robust and strong. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen to technologies such as wind and solar storage and others in the next 10 or 15 years, although we have some trends. And nobody knows exactly what business models will incent the right behaviors by people. And so the only choice we really have is to have a robust process that engages many different types of people, many different groups, and to make sure that we have an open and fact-based process that allows everybody to evaluate them and ultimately finally to come to a collective decision on the way forward, and so that we can all live with both the benefits and the fruits of that way forward and also own the fact that we probably made some mistakes along the way. Thanks.
Thank you.
Number one, make sure that the partisan politics that bankrupted PREPA and Puerto Rico government do not touch the regulatory process. That would start building trust and confidence, both consumers and investors, immediately. Number two, stick to your 21-cent average, proposed average rates going forward, and increase the demand drop to PREPA based on the urgent need for energy security. A minimum of 2 kilowatt hours homes. A industry should be allowed to generate their own energy and thus their energy security. They can do it cheaply, under 21 cents a kilowatt hour. And commerce, well, as best they can, give them the opportunity for a minimum energy security. It's the best way, in my mind, to protect the population from Puerto Rico to just evaporating faster than we can, and then no fiscal plan, no consumer to take care of.
Thank you.
Well, it's going to sound repetitive, but I'll try to focus it. A robust, integrated distribution plan that is more customer-focused, because if it is, then it will be implementable with less bureaucracy.
Thank you.
I'll take a little different tack. We need a well-defined process for distributed risk management over time and stakeholders, or to translate it into practical thing, decide who pays for resiliency and reliability and quality of service. Right now, utilities will put something because they're a provider of last resort, but actually there is no dollar value associated with providing resiliency. And so that all deals with how do we have financial incentives for risk management. Normal conditions is fine, but are we going to socialize? Reliability has been socialized in the past. Now, am I going to have differentiated reliability of service? I was listening to a pharmaceutical person. Maybe they will need better reliability and resilience and quality of service than agriculture. How do you have a system by which you have this relationship between who provides what and who pays for what and manages uncertainties? Because this is all about uncertainties. So it may sound a little academic, but I think you cannot do good integrated distributed plan. We've done our distributed integrated resource planning all for deterministic thing. This is a completely different problem. So I think there are some really serious challenges on how we pay for risks.
So that's customer segmentation.
Yes.
Customer segment, I agree with you.
Yeah. And it hasn't been that way, but I think maybe we should think about, and it would provide, more incentives for right technologies and so forth if you pay for managing that particular uncertainty by that stakeholder, by microgrids and so forth, which is not all the same, right?
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of our panelists for their time.
I know, I wanted to add one thing. I guess the way in which I'm hearing some of what we heard this morning in the earlier panel and on this one is, I think Dr. Tribble's perspective of we have to remember that it's about the people and that the plan is about delivering for the people is critical. What I heard repeatedly on this panel is There are a lot of folks involved, but let's make sure that we don't recreate a who's on first skit. And focus on anchoring and recognizing today's reality, which today's reality is a utility with serious challenges relative to liquidity, a utility that is in Title III, a utility that is facing an environment of declining consumption and challenged infrastructure. Recognizing where we are, recognizing where we can be, being flexible in how we get between here and there. And it seems to me it's the fiscal plan that really ties those pieces together. And we recognize that plans are subject to change, but it's the plan that starts with kind of what I think of as planet reality and the realities of planet reality and the needs to get to a brighter tomorrow and telling us how we work through those things. I guess that's at least what I heard from the earlier panel and for this one. That would be my summation. I don't know if I heard correctly.
Thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Folks, we will reconvene. We'll break now for lunch and reconvene at 1:30. Thank you, everybody, for their time, and thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you, Noel.
Shrink the Commission and make it a political rather than a regulatory and oversight authority. This is unfortunate. An independent energy commission is necessary to align stakeholders in light of the public interest. The governor also rolled out a plan to fully privatize the generation sector and grant a long-term concession over the distribution and transmission system. Without appropriate regulatory oversight, these transactions would lead to higher costs and adverse economic impacts to Puerto Ricans, contrary to the governor's proposed rationale for these changes. They will also result in less transparency as the island seeks to rebuild the grid after Hurricane Maria. PREPA's financial plan calls out the Commission as the primary barrier to the authority doing anything and accuses it of overreach. This comes after the Commission has spent the past 3 years working with significant public engagement to overhaul PREPA to be more transparent and organized. In 2016, the Commission ran the first public planning process for PREPA. In early 2017, the Commission's first rate case unveiled core operational and governance problems at PREPA, predicting that its deteriorated infrastructure was ill-prepared for an emergency. The board has requested that PREPA be granted the opportunity to borrow $1.3 billion to prop up operations, a move that would circumvent the statutory oversight role of the Commission. As the Commission noted in its policy statement to the board, the Commission has a statutory and a critical role in ensuring a clean and equitable energy future for the island. Puerto Ricans deserve a say as their communities rebuild after Hurricane Maria. For Puerto Rico to recover, PREPA must become more transparent and open. This will only happen with appropriate oversight. I urge the board to work with the Commission to implement the respective laws that grant them authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jonathan Smith from Earth Justice.
Good afternoon and thank you. My name is Jonathan Smith. I'm with the nonprofit public interest law organization Earth Justice. Today, on behalf of the Puerto Rico-based groups Amigos del Río Guaynabo, Cambio, Ciudadanos en Defensa del Ambiente, Comité Basura Cero Arecibo, Madres de Negro de Arecibo, and Sierra Club de Puerto Rico, I'd like to comment on the Oversight Board's ability under PROMESA to designate certain projects as critical projects. We appreciate that the board has recognized it is legally required to conduct a second public comment period, because right now many commenters may think that the current pre-report comment period for some candidates is their only chance to comment on these projects. And in addition, many Puerto Ricans are still without internet or power, so we urge the board to publish this information about critical project candidates not only on its website, but also through printouts or other methods. And in addition, we urge the board to use this power to designate critical projects to facilitate projects that are not only in the to facilitate projects that are in the long-term financial, social, and environmental interests of Puerto Rico. But we urge the board not to use this power to greenlight financially irresponsible projects that would otherwise never see the light of day. One such project under consideration is a municipal solid waste incinerator in Arecibo, as you've heard about. A new solid waste incinerator has not been built in the US for over 2 decades, and with good reason. Incinerators are the most expensive method to generate energy or handle waste. The EIA estimates that capital and operating costs per kilowatt for municipal solid waste incinerators are more than any other energy source, up to 10 times more than that of solar or wind. And incinerators have pushed US cities like Detroit and Harrisburg to the brink of or into bankruptcy through coercive contracts that charge above market tipping fees. Puerto Rico cities would be forced to pay over twice the island's average tipping fee to send their waste to the proposed incinerator. The municipality of Mayagüez estimates that it would have to pay an additional $6 million per year to send its waste to the incinerator. That's why the associations representing all of Puerto Rico's municipalities have come out strongly against the incinerator, and the Oversight Board should too. The last thing that this board should do is violate its mandate from Congress and send Puerto Rico further into debt by fast-tracking uneconomical projects like the incinerator. And the lack of economic sense about the incinerator is why the project proponent itself, in a March 2017 letter that I'll submit here, indicated that it has no realistic source of private financing for the project. And one additional critical issue facing Puerto Rico's energy future is the threats to the Puerto Rico Energy Commission that I'd like to briefly comment on as well. Now that the governor plans to privatize PREPA, we need the Energy Commission now more than ever. A weak or non-existent Energy Commission, combined with privatization, is an invitation for high energy rates and the possibility of corruption, as private equity firms swoop in to make a quick buck at the expense of Puerto Rico's financial situation and its ratepayers. We urge the board to support a strong Energy Commission and to consider the Commission as a partner in resolving the dire financial situation of Puerto Rico's energy sector. After all, Puerto Rican ratepayers deserve to have their interests protected by a utility commission, just like ratepayers in every other US state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We also have Mr. Jaime Cuevas Mercado.
I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity for comments. We represent the co-op sector and an alliance between the private and co-op sector in the island. Co-op model have been a sustainable structure for developing and maintaining and innovating electric system around the world, including the United States. Cooperatives in Puerto Rico are economic force that integrate over 900,000 people, members, 1/3 of the population of the island, and also have present in every town of the island. The co-op sector have more than $8 billion in assets in the island. Credit unions have over $100 million invested in bonds in the PREPA company. Co-op sector want to be part of the rehabilitation of the electric system with partnership of business, local business, and also business sectors around the United States and internationally. This is the question for the board. Do you envision the cooperative as an alliance and its alliance in US, Canada, and Latin America in the rehabilitation and developing sustainable and reliable electric system for our enchanted island of Puerto Rico. We just want to be part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are all the pre-registered open comments. If there is anybody else who would like to comment, we will open the floor now for additional commentary until the end of today's session. Again, everybody will have 3 minutes.
Buenas tardes a los miembros de la Junta de Control Fiscal. Nuevamente, mi nombre es Ángel Figueroa Jaramillo y represento a los hombres y mujeres que hoy, mientras aquí se discute cómo destruir una corporación creada por un pueblo, están levantando el sistema eléctrico. Hombres que hace más de 75 años, frente a la falta de compromiso y responsabilidad del sector privado de desarrollar socialmente a nuestro pueblo, porque no era costo efectivo llevar la electricidad, y creamos un monopolio del país para llevar electricidad a cada rincón de nuestro pueblo. Aquí no se habla del monopolio partidista, que es donde el pueblo ha delegado su responsabilidad para administrar las agencias de gobierno y las corporaciones públicas y la han llevado al extremo que estamos hoy discutiendo. Pero es más fácil negar responsabilidad y acusar a otros. Ese desarrollo de nuestro país conllevó una infraestructura amplia y versátil. Los que no conocen ampliamente nuestro sistema eléctrico hablan con la visión de negocio y no la visión social. Nuestro sistema eléctrico está construido para realizar microgrids hace más de 40 años. Por eso se aprendió Mayagüez primero, Arecibo después, y así sucesivamente San Juan, porque fue construido y desarrollado para ese propósito. Por lo tanto, la tecnología no se puede estar hablando si no es en bienestar de un pueblo, no el pueblo en bienestar y el lucro de una tecnología. Hay que hablarle claro al país. Este proceso no va a crear ninguna libre competencia como quieren proyectar. Si fuera así, ¿por qué AES y Ecoeléctrica no han entrado al mercado de libre competencia? Hay que hablarle claro al país. Segundo, ahora dentro de un mercado, dentro de una industria ya madura, es que todo el mundo quiere entrar y ayudarnos, entre comillas. Utilizando fondos públicos federales para reconstruir un sistema que el capital privado no quiere invertir. Y así muy fácil se asume el control de una industria tan importante para el pueblo de Puerto Rico. Porque es una industria madura. Aquí se ha hablado claramente que nadie ha hablado categóricamente de la reducción de costos de la energía del pueblo de Puerto Rico. Una industria que la realidad objetiva va en descenso en venta de su producto, en pérdida de migración, que la única forma de que cualquier sector privado que viene a generar ganancia pueda recuperar el mismo es aumentándole los costos al pueblo de Puerto Rico. Y eso es importante decírselo de frente al país en este proceso. Por lo tanto, todos creemos en la transformación del modelo, pero no del modelo público, sino del modelo energético. Que cada ciudadano tenga la opción real de escoger su tecnología para su desarrollo personal, particular, comunitario, dentro de ese modelo público. Y eso es que invitamos a la Junta, a que realmente tengan frente a ustedes el fracaso o el acierto de sus decisiones hoy. Lo que hoy nos hemos percatado aquí es coincido con muchos sectores que no podemos utilizar a Puerto Rico como un experimento para lo que quieren hacer. Puerto Rico hoy no puede ser experimento. A los que no viven en nuestro país lo puedo ver y lo puedo entender, pero los que vivimos en nuestro país son los que vamos a sufrir de los fracasos de ese experimento. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, señor Jaramillo. For the audience, this will be included in the official transcript and also translated into English.
Buenas tardes, good evening, good afternoon to everyone here. My name is Máximo Torres. I'm from Máximo Solar Industries. We are a solar contractor with presence in Puerto Rico and Florida. We've been in business for 9 years. We have over 6,000 installations at the residential level, and we have over 1,500 installations with energy storage. More than that, Máximo Solar also is a manufacturer of PV racking and battery cabinets in Puerto Rico. We are receiving our Law 83, so we are a witness of a good law that helped Puerto Rico develop some of our renewable energy infrastructure. Previous to Hurricane Maria, we have many projects, and after Maria, we doubled the amount of projects that we face. The amount of people looking for energy storage as a resilient opportunity for them is amazing. It's huge. Our headquarters were not damaged by Maria. Our headquarters run with our own microgrid and still working after the hurricane, and is still interacting with PREPA when PREPA returned. Our statement is not for the solar industry or the utilities, but for the consumer that is looking for alternative. We account for about 20,000 people that have purchased a solar system in Puerto Rico, and probably the number is bigger, that account for over $250 million of investment right here in Puerto Rico. And that could easily be 10 times or 50 times higher with the right incentive. We work with Equal, Tesla, Deca, and Face, many of the energy storage products in Puerto Rico. Of course, many of the things that I had in my statement will be in the email. I sent it to the email. Many of them has been commented by some of the experts, so I will stay with some that maybe hasn't been discussed. This transformation entails economic growth through manufacturing, distribution, service, creating jobs, and a sustainable economy. We believe that due to our advantage, geographical location, position, and the USA leadership in renewable energy, Puerto Rico should become a leader in renewable energy and a bridge to technologies to the Latin American market. That opens a lot of other possibilities. The last thing that I'd like to mention, renewables cannot be seen as an income detractor, but as a local infrastructure investor and drivers of economic development that contributes to energy stability. And last, PREPA is not the enemy. PREPA has been developing the economy of Puerto Rico for many years. Maybe it's not the occasion now, but we cannot ignore the amount of knowledge, talent, and potential that PREPA has to be part. I don't see anybody from PREPA here. So I wonder if these initiatives are going to be, oh yes, there's some people from PREPA, but I mean operational people. But I wonder if this initiative will occur like many others that have done the Energy Commission, the government with many laws. If we don't get PREPA to participate in these efforts, if they don't really believe that they can make a change for Puerto Rico, we will have a big ankle dragger in all of these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have time for one last comment.
Yes, good afternoon. This is a great event. Congratulations. My name is Jorge Camacho. I'm an electrical engineer with 25 years on the sector, from New Orleans to Washington, D.C. I'm going to be talking on behalf, I am a member of the IEEE Standard 1547 Working Group, and I want to read a statement from the IEEE. As you know, the IEEE is the world's largest technical organization in the advancement of technology. And I will also, I see many people, familiar people, and I would like to use probably 30 seconds to say something on my own personal capacity. So the IEEE statement is in regards to codes, national codes and standards. This morning, there was the issue of safety. And we do know that the infrastructure in Puerto Rico, for one reason or another, it was lax into meeting certain codes and standards, and now we're paying the price of not actually planning ahead. So the IEEE statement reads like this: as Puerto Rico and other regions devastated by natural disasters rebuild their electric infrastructure and consider and incorporate distributed energy resources, microgrids, and other technologies, the IEEE Standards Association, the global standards development arm of the IEEE, we like to stress the importance of open, voluntary, consensus-based standards and the role that the standards have when governance bodies are developing their infrastructure, strategies, and rebuilding. Technical standards provide people and organizations with a basis for mutual understanding and are instruments to facilitate communication, measurement, commerce, and manufacturing. They help ensure safety and reliability, enable innovation, and open new market opportunities to their users by allowing seamless integration of products, services, and processes. And they create ecosystems that promote economy of scale and healthy competition. Technical standards that are developed in a globally open and inclusive standards development paradigm, one which the IEEE embraces, help ensure strong integration, interoperability, and increased synergies along the innovation chain across national and regional boundaries. Working within a framework of open participation and diversity, this paradigm espouses competition and in the same time collaboration among stakeholders to drive innovation and market advancement. The IEEE 1547 family of standards for DER is an example of global voluntary standards produced in this paradigm. The IEEE 1547 series has helped to modernize electric power systems infrastructure by providing a foundation for integrating clean, renewable energy technologies as well as other distributed generation and energy storage technologies. IEEE 1547 provides functional technical requirements and specifications as well as flexibility and choices about equipment and operating details that are in compliance with the standard. And to finish the statement, the IEEE Conformity Assessment Program, ICAP, helps develop certification programs around the IEEE standards so that industry can benefit from procuring certified goods and systems that have demonstrated compliance to the standard. ICAP is actively developing certification program around the IEEE 1547 commissioning. And I'm going to close the parentheses. This is rather important. Yeah, this is rather important. As you know, right now you are using Wi-Fi. You are interconnecting to Wi-Fi because of an IEEE standard, which is the 802.11. We were hearing today, now I'm going to spend 20 seconds into what it is that I can provide to you in regards to the experience that we have gathered as leading the modernization initiative for Washington, D.C. We heard many people today, actors that are non-utility. For example, we heard Victor, we heard Chris, Praveen from AES. And these are the people that are saying, we want to interconnect to the grid. We're seeing all these different actors, and that is the paradigm shift that we see in the utility. Victor is talking about actually we're going to be decreasing revenues. In reality, we need to be thinking about how these non-utility actors could actually collaborate with the utility. So actually, there may be some deferral capital investments so they can actually gain from these actors interconnecting to the grid.
Thank you, Mr. Camacho. If we could incorporate those documents into the record.
It will be incorporated.
Thank you.
And the last thing I want to know, I see Sue here, and I want to be very clear, and I want to recognize Sue and the APPA. Since the day after Maria, they went the extra mile for Puerto Rico, being available to actually provide resources. And I wanted to recognize Sue and her team, Mike, which were great providing help.
Thank you, Mr. Camacho. This brings us to the end of the public comment period. Thank you for everybody who took the time to share their comments with us. Now, our Executive Director, Ms. Natalie Jaresko, has some closing comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I just want to comment on several of the requests that were made. We did issue a statement officially notifying the public that there would be a second comment period for the critical projects. What we can do is this time issue it again and take it out as an ad in newspapers if to add to the issue that people don't have access to the internet or the web or the internet. So we'll do that shortly so that everyone is fully aware and there's no confusion about the second upcoming public comment period. I want to thank everyone who joined us today, our chairman, Jose Carrion, Judge Gonzalez, Jose Ramon Gonzalez, Ana Montesantos, and Professor Skeel, Mr. Sobrino. I want to thank all the panelists for your time and all the preparation, to Noel for moderating today's discussion. Sometimes I felt like we were going to get the best possible answers because everyone only had one thing that they could name, and it was very helpful. I want to thank all of you who attended today, including those who joined us live through the webcast and members of the press. Today's listening session, I think, was a key step in outlining some of the revisions that are necessary in the submitted PREPA fiscal plan. I think that we've all agreed, and there's no disagreement, that delivering affordable, reliable, and cleaner power to the clients, the customers in Puerto Rico is critical to Puerto Rico's economic development and revitalization. And as we think about Puerto Rico's new reality, it's key for the Oversight Board, the government, and our representative advisors to listen to you, the experts. Thank you again for your attendance, and remember that Puerto Rico needs all hands on deck to enable the island to recover and move forward. Muchas gracias.